Hello there, Seraphim17 once again. This is my Shadow Warrior 3 Hardcore Difficulty video walkthrough. This is the very beginning of the game, and we are on our quest to defeat the dragon. So, Shadow Warrior 3. A game I would have loved to have shared a lot earlier, but unfortunately didn't have the tools to do so, thanks to a game-breaking bug I got on my version of the game. I'm indeed playing this on the PC. It is the Steam version, and I'm using a Pulsar Xlite V2 Mini as my weapon of choice, and I was using it on a AMP 500 hybrid mousepad, which is a cool mousepad, but too short for me personally. So when this game first came out, I was very excited for it. If you don't know much about my channel, I'm quite an aficionado when it comes to this particular title. Also, you'll have to excuse some of the freezing moments that's happening in the gameplay here, guys. Every so often when I'm recording with OBS, I get these encoding overload messages, and it does things like that where it halts the visuals, but you can hear the audio in the background. And I've messed with that setting a lot. I've talked about this a decent amount, so I'm not going to go on here too much. But it's one of those things where it never happens during a load screen, or during a boring moment, or during a moment where you don't want the gameplay to be recorded in a very nice fashion. It always happens at the most exciting parts, and you could think it's things along the lines of, you know, in response to stress on the hardware, on your CPU, on your GPU, on whatever it is that you're using. Then you look at the taskbar, and the taskbar isn't reflecting what's happening in OBS, because OBS just works in mysterious ways. So just hopefully it doesn't turn up too much, and we can not get too distracted by it, and you can enjoy this visual splendor that is Shadow Warrior 3. So it came out earlier this year, and I was really excited to play it, and I came across a soft lock in the game. There's a mission later on where you have to open a gate, and it involves pressing a couple of these altars, and when you press these altars, what happens then is it powers this animation, and it progresses the level for you, and that never happened to me. It just completely shut the game down, and I was unable to play, so I ended up, you know, uninstalling it, and then coming back several months later. And fortunately, several months later, the game's in a much better state. I was getting much better frames. It was running a lot, just in a more polished and smooth feeling experience when it was in motion. And I compromised some settings to try and get the frames as high as I can, because the game feels a lot nicer when the frames are high, of course. And in that space, in that interim between me leaving the game for a little while, doing some other things and coming back, the developers have supported it in some interesting ways, and one of them is they've introduced the hardcore difficulty. And apparently there was a lot of criticisms over the previous difficulty, because hard was just not hard enough for some people's minds. And you might notice that this game is heavily inspired by Doom Eternal, or Doom 2016. It has the glory kill mechanic. It has this emphasis on the enemies being these unique encounters, and each of them has a kind of specific option of how you want to engage them and how you want to usurp them in your quest to save the world or save what, you know, Lo Wang's interested in this particular moment. And if you've played this game, you'll know that I'm trimming out a decent amount of stuff that happens, because this game is not very long. It's a very short game, especially considering if you compare it to something like Shadow Warrior 2. Whereas, once you take those cutscenes out, once you take out a lot of the platforming, which I'm going to be doing as well, this platforming here is an addition to this game to kind of break up the combat sequences, but in my opinion it goes on too long. It's nowhere near as fluid or as interesting as it could be, so I find it profoundly boring, and I don't want to force it on you guys any more than you already will do when you're playing the game, so I'm just going to completely remove it. And when you do that, well, I say when you do that, even before you do that, if you skip all the cutscenes on this game, and you beat the game in a decent click, like I did. I skipped all cutscenes on this recording, and I beat hardcore. My first attempt, I'd never played the difficulty before. It took me 4 hours, and that might seem like a nice chunk of time for some people for a campaign, and I do think it is. I don't mind a nice 4-hour campaign as long as it's good, as long as it's got some focus and I can enjoy it. Most people will look at that though and think it's a horrendous and a travesty. It should be 50 hours long, and I've never really understood the idea of a 60-hour game. Because generally, most games that stick around for 60 hours, if they're not JRPGs or massive open-world games filled with fucking busy work, they're generally games that probably aren't paced very well, that you don't even want to play for 60 hours. So this whole dick measuring contest of game length has always baffled me, and I've talked about it for years. In Shadow Warriors, weakness, I would say, is that the game could have been a little bit longer. because most of that time is spent platforming. When the action does turn up, it's very fun, but it's quite infrequent. And every so often there are moments where it is, shall we say, inconsistently designed in what they fire at you as far as the encounters go. Because there's a mixture of decent encounters that are both small, medium and large. And some of the large ones, especially if you're not on it and you're not immediately getting rid of the big threats, because it has inherited this Doom Eternal DNA, this Doom 2016 motif of these jobber fodder enemies will spawn infinitely to give you the resources to stay alive, and then you use those resources to kill the bigger things in the environment. And this opening battle here on the back of the dragon is just against the standard fodder enemy. It's just a normal man running around attacking you in his kimono, and every so often you get a Kugutsu, I think they're called, which is that man there, who is, I believe Kugutsu is Japanese for puppet, so he's some kind of marionette. And the game here is introducing you to this mechanic, which is you build up a bar that's in the bottom left by killing enemies and generating these orbs that go towards these glory kills. And then when you kill an enemy with this glory animation, you steal something from them. You essentially become Kirby in Smash 64, and you gulp them up, and you inherit their fiercest attribute. And then from there, you can use that attribute to then go and destroy the rest of their friends. And it leads to this interesting mind game of ascertaining what is the biggest threat on the battlefield, who's the enemy that you want to get rid of, you know, generating this resource, and then banking this resource on whoever gives you the biggest reward and the biggest prize. And on my first playthrough, before I hit that glitch and I couldn't progress, I did feel like the glory kill ability in this game was not the same kind of ethos as the one in the Doom games, where you use those to get resources back, you use them for the iframes, you use them to survive. Whereas in this game, it feels like you store it up and you save it for the problem that you don't want to deal with. And it reminds me of storing chainsaw charges in Doom 2016 to immediately get rid of a big dude, because why the hell would you waste time fighting him when you can just saw him in half and he goes down and you get ammo back? So it feels a lot closer to that, and it also feels a lot closer to, you know, picking your poison. Which tool do you want? Which move do you go towards? And on that front, it reminds me of Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep, and then by extension, Kingdom Hearts 3, where a lot of the combat in Kingdom Hearts is pretty damn good. It's got a lot of complexity to it and a lot of depth if you want to get into the, you know, the really advanced stuff in stuff like Kingdom Hearts 2 Final Mix and some of the different combos you can do in something like Birth by Sleep. But most people don't really play it for that. Most people just kind of mash on the enemies, and then every so often these form changes take place, and then they go really, really fantastical and beautiful. And Kingdom Hearts did this a ton, didn't it? Where you'd fight on somebody, then you'd turn into a ballerina, and then you'd turn into a pirate ship, and then there'd be fireworks going off, there'd be a million neon lights, you'd have epilepsy, you'd swallow your tongue, you'd die, you'd be revived, and now you were something else. You were some ridiculously profound bouncing ball going up and down and crushing everything. And Kingdom Hearts had these forms that were just ludicrously overpowered and seemed to completely contradict any sense of risk in the encounters, because you could just go into these crazy forms and do these insanely safe moves that cleared the entire horizon. And I feel like that's what the weapons in this game feel like at times when you steal them from the enemies. And when I came back later on and started playing it on stream to have an experience, and when I came back and started doing this recording, it did become apparent that that was still the case. There's still very much a Kingdom Hearts 3 itis of going to a fight, go up to the biggest monster there, kill him, and then use whatever he gives you after the glory kill to kill everybody else. But I do think they toned it down a little bit, and I do think that they went and they did some appropriate changes to make it feel like you have to partake a little bit more than you do before. And to me that is absolutely essential, because as much as this is quite a difficult difficulty, hardcore does have its challenges, which we will discuss. It is also quite easy if you play it the right way. And I'm a big fan of this, personally. I know it might sound contradictory and strange and hypocritical, but I don't think you should make a difficulty hard on purpose, because I usually feel like hard difficulties that are made to be hard generally suffer by the fact that they're being designed by people that don't understand what is difficult. And you see this all the time, difficulties that are hard for the sake of being hard rather than because it complements the gameplay or it leads to an enjoyable player experience. And there's something that I want to say here, because I think that it's one of those opinions that I will never fully understand and never really come to have any kind of harmony with, which is the idea of the director of Doom Eternal saying that he thinks it's okay for a player to be frustrated. And I really resent that mindset. I know what he means, and I know what it means for the balance of the game, but I don't agree with it. Because when I was playing this game, guys, I was not frustrated. I was only ever frustrated in about 3 fights, and those 3 fights I think are badly designed. Do you see the difference there? Like, to me, I do stuff in video games that people don't really do, you know? There is a subset, fringe, and niche of players that push games to different levels, and if you're part of my community, you do the same thing, you know? If you're listening to this, you probably do the same thing. We are not the norm, guys. We are not the type of person that does the same thing as everybody else. We like to push it a bit further and see what happens then. We like to see what's happening on the very edges, the very tether, you know, like you're out there in the void of some strange place of a challenge run, of some ridiculous idea, and seeing whether or not it's possible, and seeing whether or not the game holds up in that moment. Because when you push a game to its nth degree, you realise that not all games survive such scrutiny, you know, such isolation. A lot of the times it can be the unfurling of their mechanics. It can really show you the flaws and really show you the areas where it just wasn't thought about to the extent it needed to come through and be an enjoyable experience on what you're doing. And in many ways, I think that this game nails it pretty damn well. I think it's got a lot of features here that work once you get past some of the bugs. I don't want to talk too much about the bugs, guys, but this game is really fucking buggy. You come across a bug every 5 minutes. I've come across soft locks twice on the recording of this guide, and it's kind of obnoxious to me. I just don't understand it. I didn't really have any of these problems with Shadow Warrior 2, and to me, I just think it's unacceptable. But this is an enemy called the Oni Hanma, I believe his name is, which might be Japanese for something like Demon Hammer. I think I read that on a wiki somewhere. And this is an enemy that used to be quite a cream puff and just used to rush you and try and pretend to be like a Baron of Hell. But now on this difficulty, because of his damage and because of his range and because of just the sheer difficulty you have in stopping him doing what he wants to do now, he's become a legitimate threat. And they throw these enemies at you in quite the number, so you want to be very careful with that monster and try to do your best to kind of shut him down. And he's here again. And the difficulty you'll have is the difficulty that I had, whereas his move has massive range, and it doesn't really look like it should, but every so often he just kind of really rails you and nails you, and you might get stuck on something, or maybe you weren't moving too good or using your mobility, and he just hits you and he chunks you in a nuclear amount. And it's going to happen, you know, it's one of those things. And here he is again. But going back to this idea of a player being frustrated, as a director, and as somebody that analyses game design, I never want the person I'm directing the game at to be frustrated. That's not something I want to do. Everything I think about on a mechanical level, on an interaction and an engagement level, stems from the perspective of not being frustrated. And I don't think that you have to be frustrated to be challenged. I don't think they're the same things. And this could be completely personal, this could be 100% subjective, and I might just be swaying my own personality bias into this conversation. But to me, when I get frustrated in a game, I want to turn it off. And that's not a feeling that I want to simulate for other people. To me, that is an absurdity. That is something that to me, you've not done your job right. And I do believe that Hugo is using this term and using this phrase in a very particular manner to say that some people don't know that they want to be uncomfortable until they are uncomfortable and they overcome it. And I think it comes from the Dark Souls generation that we've now been birthed into. This idea of people who have never played a difficult game, playing difficult games, and realising that there's merits to not getting everything immediately and being on this linear roller coaster of success and yes men and people patting you on the back and saying, didn't you do a great job, when you did absolutely fuck all. So I think Dark Souls has changed the mentality of a lot of people that would have never normally touched a game that did kill them. And I think that's what he's speaking to. He's speaking to the idea of it's okay to lose, it's okay to fail, it's the paths to improvement. But I think the way that he said it and the way that he conveyed it, that's what I take issue with. This right here is a laser shogun. This is an enemy that when I came back after my break from the game, I was really frustrated with it because I forgot how to fight it. And much like the Eternal Influences, pretty much most of the enemies in this game have some kind of exploit that you can do to give you a bit of an advantage. And this guy is one of the ones with a hard counter. And his hard counter is the Chi Blast. So Wang can send his hand out and fire a nice Chi Blast to people, and it will stun them, it will generate ammo if you get some upgrades, it will do a handful of things, it'll even give you some HP if you get the upgrades. But what it does on this guy, consistently, is it turns him around. And this monster is designed to snipe you at a distance. He's designed to be a woodpecker. He literally sits in a corner, on a tree, pecking the wood, annoying you with the sound. And if you get unlucky enough to stop moving, he'll hit you and he'll hurt on this difficulty. So you want to make it your your main goal to find this dude, go up to him, chi blast him, and then finish him off quickly with something damaging. And if you do that, he will never be an issue. But if you forget that you can chi blast him, it turns into a bit of a pain in the ass where he won't turn around and it gets really annoying. And I got pretty salty on my stream over that, but it was my fault. And I learned from it, and then you guys can learn from it too, because he has a hard weakness. So use it. But this idea of improvement, self-improvement and failure being a learning tool, I believe in wholeheartedly. I think that that is the greatest teacher. I think that that is the pinnacle of learned design. I think that's Mario 1-1. You run forward on Mario, you jump that gap, and if you don't make it, you realise you fucked up immediately. And it's a very organic experience. It feels natural. It feels like the game's teaching you without somebody overtly doing so. And there are many games that do this. Funnily enough, this game does a better job of it than Doom Eternal does. Because this game doesn't immediately pop up a big chart, a big printed fucking Windows Excel spreadsheet of every enemy detail, the size of its dick and balls, its fucking, the circumference of its perineum, and then it goes on to tell you every weakness, every, like, intolerance to some wheat allergy that it's got, and then every girlfriend it ever had in secondary school. They let you fight, they let you learn, they let you lose, and then when you die, the tooltips tell you things. And when I was recording this guide, before I got to the laser shoguns, and I was really frustrated at them because I didn't remember how to kill them very well, the tooltip said, if you chi blast a laser shogun, he will turn around and be vulnerable. And it's that wonderful learning moment of, you know, I'm on an interim here between a level, and I'm learning things. You're not freezing the gameplay, you're not taking control away from me, you're not giving me this overhead projector and this massive fucking ridiculous university dissertation on it. You're telling me that there is depth to this game that I can discover, and every so often on a tooltip I might be able to find it naturally and organically, which is really good. But bringing it back to that idea of it's okay for the player to be frustrated, I disagree. And I'm not your average player, you know, I'm not a guy who started Dark Souls and quit the Asylum because it was too hard. I didn't die 3 times, get really frustrated, wondered where the FIFA minigame was, and then leave the game. I'm not that kind of person. I started playing video games where they were black and green, and I was using a keyboard, and the game was on a cassette. And when I started at the very beginning of that game, I waited for like 7 minutes for that piece of shit to load, and then when it did load, I ran to the other side of the room, it then loaded again and crashed. And I spent weeks trying to get out of that room, and I never made it, you know? And that was when I was a kid, that was when I was forging the pathways in my brain to understand what interacting with this medium was. And if I was willing to sit through Commodore 64 load times to try to get to the other side of a Batcave on a game that refused to work, do you really think I'm the kind of person that's simply going to quit when something doesn't go my way? You know, I've been forged in the crucible of arduous games. And because games started to get easier, what do you do in response to that? You start to alter how you play the game to make it enjoyable for you. And speaking of altering the game, this is a Mogura twin. This enemy is a really, really cool enemy. He drills around, and then he busts out of the ground, and then he fires saws at you while he does so. And I really like the design of this guy. He's got a very fascinating glory kill weapon, where he enables you to drill people, like Bioshock 2. But the problem is you're vulnerable when you do that, and you can die, so it's kind of dangerous. And my one critique of this monster is the sound design, and this is a 100% personal thing, this. When he's digging on the ground and he hits you, it sounds like you're being comboed in Killer Instinct. And that noise, to me, is super fucking irritating because it reminds me of doing something wrong and eating a combo. So when I'm hearing that dun 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 dun, like I'm getting straight up my ass beat and I can't break out of it. And a lot of the times it feels like he's nowhere near you and he's still hitting you with that shit, which is kind of frustrating too. But here we go. Now this is something I need to talk about because on this difficulty, this is where shit gets real. So this creature is called the Seeking Shokera, and I didn't think hardcore was that bad until I bumped into these. So this monster here is this floating djinn on this weird saucer, and he fires all kinds of things at you, and he is by far the hardest part of the game. Whenever those dudes turn up, you want to get as much distance as you can and hit them with everything you can hit them with. If you can hit them with basilisks, hit them with basilisks. If you can hit them with, you know, with your Raging Bull, the rocket launcher, hit them with that. Hit them with the biggest damage you can and kill them quickly. I would not recommend using your glory kills on them. There's no real need to do so. But just know they are a giant pain in the ass and they will kill you instantly. This enemy really made me feel like the difficulty was kind of badly balanced at times. because up to this point I had no problems with any fights, and then I got instantly deleted by this creature, and this creature to me should not do this kind of damage. I feel like he should be the kind of threat that if you ignore him, the damage builds and builds and builds, and then you get yourself into a situation where you lose because it's your fault for not focusing and prioritizing on him. But there are some encounters where there's 5 of those guys, and if they all spam that spell, and if you're in it and you try jumping and dashing and getting the hell out of there, you just die. And one of the ways to get around it is if you use a glory kill on one of the standard fodders, you will get, I think it's like 100 HP back, and you can over buff your HP to 200. And if you're having a difficult time with this game, guys, that's what you should do. Always save up a glory charge, always get your HP to 200, and then you'll never die because you'll never get into the burst range of this enemy to do its crazy shenanigans. But, like right now, because I'm near these 2 dudes, if they start doing their funny thing, you just get your ass beat. And the reason I did that glory kill just then is because I felt like I was on the verge of about to get barraged, so I came in and I killed them. And then a couple more spawn, and I'm going to go from here to try and get rid of the laser shogun, and then proceed to take these dudes down as best as I can. But look at my HP. You know, I've only got 60 HP right now. If they do anything in my vicinity, I'm going to be in trouble, but I'm just trying to keep my space, keep away from these bombs that they're dropping, and just try not to get overwhelmed, because I do think there's a bit of a disconnect in this game between when you're really low life and when you're damaged, because the screen goes red when you do certain interactions and you don't even have low HP. So as a player, because you're so conditioned to think that low HP means low, you know, red screen, you can be perfectly fine and feel like you're dying, so that then when you start to die, you can feel like you spent the whole time getting your ass kicked and you don't understand what you did wrong. And I think that's a problem with video game language that they fucked up on right there. Over here, anyhow, is the Basilisk. And when you pick it up, these enemies all spawn. So now you have access to the biggest damage grouping that you will get in the game. You can swap between the Raging Bull, swap between the Basilisk, and then swap between something like the shotgun or the submachine guns, depending on what you want to do. And then this encounter here is really, really reinforcing the fact that this game wants you to engage with its environments and use all of these crazy tools. And if you do this correctly, you can shut down most of these fights before they even start, because these tools are so strong they will immediately kill all the Oni-Hannas, all the Seeking Shikoras and whatnot, and just do an insane amount of damage. But be very careful. Between these magicians sending all of this magic your way and that big old Raging Bull dude coming at you, you are going to take some serious hits here if you're not careful. And you can be injured by the traps as well. So be very careful when it comes to overextension. Overextension is the greatest fear, I think. And another thing to think about too, which you're seeing me do organically, as we're getting a bigger arsenal here, it's giving you more and more weapons. And one of the changes on hardcore is they made the ammunition a little bit more limited. So you do want to try to swap between the weapons if you can. You don't have to be really good at it. You don't have to be really quick and, you know, crazy and straight up, you know, lightning break or something from Doom Eternal. I think that was his name. You don't have to do those precision bolt into 50 different weapons in half a frame. It's cool that you can try and be very quick and get very efficient, and of course you can mitigate some reloads and do some reload cancelling if you swap between certain things. So I definitely recommend that you get into the habit of cycling through your weapons, just so that you spend all the ammunition and you get comfortable with the idea of doing it. Additionally, there's no real need in this game to use some of the bindings you might normally use in other games, so you can feel free to rebind face bindings to something that is a weapon that's a bit easier to press. For instance, I would definitely be rebinding things like X, and rebinding things like V, and rebinding things like even G or T, because you don't really use those buttons in this game. You know, you don't really use F in this game outside of the executions, but I don't know if you can even change that. Hell, I'd even change interact if I could, because you barely interact with things in this game, but again, I don't know if the bindings let you do that. Some do, some don't. One of my favourite games for bindings is Quake, because in Quake, you literally touch everything with your body, and you don't need to slide, you don't need to, you know, lay down on the ground or anything, you don't need to do a million stupid fucking modern conventions, so you can put every gun on a button you like pressing, and you can swap between those weapons confidently and comfortably, and feel like an absolute god, and that's why Quake will always be, to me, probably the greatest shooter ever made. But this is the Slinky Jackoos, and I'm getting my ass kicked. This weapon is absurdly strong too. It takes up 9,000% of the screen. You can't see a goddamn thing. You might die while using it, but it is ludicrously strong. And because we have these djinns everywhere, we're going to be shooting the living shit out of them to try and get rid of all those guys, because everybody else here is fine. You know, the puppets are fine, the standard jobbers are fine. Those guys over there, the Slinking Jackoo, he needs to go because he's leaving environmental traps. And of course the djinn, he needs to go too, but other than that, you're absolutely fine. And as long as you can recoup and you can figure it out, you'll be a-okay. But I'm never going to finish this tangent, am I? I've got 2 hours here to finish this tangent, and I'm going to keep getting interrupted by the awesome gameplay of Shadow Warrior 3. Which you might have noticed then, I tried to push the environmental hazard towards the Mogura twins. And the environmental hazards in Shadow Warrior 2 were absolutely absurd. You could literally kill everything in that game pretty much. You're just using environmental hazards and some interesting movement. You can't really do that in this game. You have to spend at least 3 upgrades to make the environmental hazards good, and even then the best one is the freeze one, and you can already freeze people using your sword if you're not going to be using the restrictions I'm using, which I will talk about later on again. This is a fun encounter, this, but what you're seeing there too is a little glimpse of something you might have seen before, which you can animation cancel the rocket launcher to do really high DPS. And you don't even have to swap weapons either. You can slash cancel with your sword. And all you do, guys, is you shoot the rocket, you slash your sword, you shoot the rocket, you slash your sword, and you will interrupt the animation of Lo Wang feeding the rocket into the weapon, and it will just fire immediately. And it is one of the strongest techniques for deleting the bosses and deleting anything big. It's not very interesting, you know, it's not going to make your dick hard in how stylish it is, but it's goddamn effective, and this is a walkthrough, and walkthroughs should have goddamn effective strategies, right? But back to the idea of being frustrated. I'm not a player who is easily frustrated outside of maybe when I'm on live stream. That's a different thing though. When it comes to playing and actually sitting down with the game and engaging with it, I don't play games that frustrate me. I actively avoid games that frustrate me because it's not a fun feeling. And as you people know, if you're a fan of my channel and you've seen what I've done in the last 10 years, I'm not somebody that is averse to challenge. I'm not somebody that is averse to being uncomfortable. I'm not someone who is averse to learning or putting themselves in a difficult position. So the frustration then changes from being, oh, this player's frustrated because they're not quite getting it, they will and it will feel satisfying, to, if I'm frustrated, it's because I'm not going to enjoy your game. So frustration to me is an easy signifier that I'm going to have a really miserable time with that video game, and if I continue to play it, I might get more efficient, I might become more learned and have a greater understanding and grasping of the mechanics, but if it does not alleviate the frustration, then it's not meant for me. You know, there are plenty of games that I find to be quite unfun and frustrating because they just don't tickle that particular itch that I need that keeps me engaged. A great example of this is Sekiro, a game that is absolutely adored by lots and lots of people, is a game that I absolutely despise and find incredibly frustrating because of all the potential it could have had, and then the miserable delivery of what it was. And of course, it's still a fantastic game that a lot of people love, but I will never play it again because I do not enjoy that game. And you could argue, if you've only seen my blind playthrough, oh Chris, it's because you were playing it wrong, or Chris, it's because you were bad at it. Which is fine, if you feel that way. Good for you, bro. But then if you watch the walkthrough I made, where I beat the whole game without taking any damage, the argument stops. I beat everything in that game. Right? Everything from the start to the end, to hit those credits, without taking a single hit. If you do that with a game, you are not some entry-level scrub complaining it's badly designed, when in reality you're just ignorant. That's not who you are. You know, and here is the thing that I don't understand, and the thing that I don't want to facilitate, and I don't want this to be propagated at all because I disagree with it fervently. A player does not have to be frustrated to feel satisfaction when they win. A player does not need to be frustrated to enjoy a difficult game. A difficult game does not need to be by virtue frustrating in order to be difficult. This is a bad mentality, and it is something that I do not want to see people carrying forward because it's missing the fucking point. And the irony here is, you might think I'm missing the point, which I might be. This might just be the way my brain perceives reality. But to me, every difficult thing I've ever done in a video game, I have loved in the moment. I've hated it too. I've hated it and loved it like a family member. I've been so close to it that it's all I've ever thought about. It's been on the tip of my tongue. It's been in the back of my brain. It's been overriding every thought. Because when you're in that moment of doing something challenging, it is so addicting because you know it will be worth it when you achieve it. And you're not entirely certain whether or not you can do it, which is what makes it even more fascinating. And if you were to talk to me in those moments, I'd probably sound miserable as fuck and angry and shout at you and immediately dismiss you in borderline autistic breakdown, you know? Because my brain is so in that trauma, it's so in that wound, it's in that moment, and it wants to succeed. And it knows that maybe the next one will be it. But I'm not frustrated, you know? I only get frustrated when I feel like I'm being cheated, robbed, or condescended. And I think there's a huge distinction there and separation of those ideas. I don't think they're the same. I'd just also like to add as well, guys, if I say you know a lot, which I've heard myself going back on this commentary to stop a desk bang that I just did, I apologise from every fibre of my being. We've been analysing a lot of Darkside Phil recently on stream, and because he's lying through his teeth the entire fucking time, he's constantly saying, you know, and unfortunately, the wonderful joys of the human brain, we have mirror neurons that steal from the things we're exposed to in our environments, so my brain has picked it up, and it is currently sabotaging my ability to speak. And as appetising as it is going back over this and editing out every you know, I don't simply have the time to do that because I'm supposed to be packing today because I'm going on holiday. But I'd just like to say, if you hear it and it frustrates you, I am sorry. I don't mean to do it. It is a verbal thought process. It is just the cogs moving in my brain, and it is very annoying. And now that I've mentioned it, you're going to hear it now, and it's going to annoy you even more. And speaking of annoying, we have the Hattori, which I'm assuming this enemy is named after, is it Hattori Hanzo, the famous guy? This enemy is really, really interesting. It reminds me of an enemy from Bayonetta 2. Only in Bayonetta 2 the enemy was an absolute nightmare, whereas in this game he's actually not too bad. So the Hattori is a swordsman who has these orbs that levitate above his head, which are a shield that you have to damage before you can get, I think, a guaranteed flinch on him. Truth be told, I don't know the enemy very well because I generally just steal his sword and kill everybody with it. And I think that's the best strategy for the Hattoris if you can. If you build up the glory kill bar, enabling you to kill him and steal his blade, he has a very, very good special ability where you teleport around slashing people and you kill them in a couple of slashes and it clears rooms very quickly. So I definitely think that he is high on the totem pole of what you should be stealing, so definitely do it if you can. And right here I'm showcasing the elemental abilities on the sword, and I need to talk about this because you might wonder in this walkthrough, Chris, why didn't you use the sword more? And I come from Shadow Warrior 2, a game where you can beat the whole game with the sword, and you probably should because it's amazing. The melee weapons in that game are absurdly strong, and they can carry you with good movement through every encounter. And if you watch that walkthrough, I'm a very melee-focused player. I use the weapons every so often, but fundamentally I use movement, and I use elemental weakness, and I use weapons that are of the bladed variety. And because I did that so much in the second game, I didn't want to do that on this walkthrough. And it turns out using the sword is actually pretty good because you can be holding it when you're running away, when you're running out of ammo, you can fire the projectiles, you can level up the abilities so that they do more damage and such, and you can also freeze enemies with it, which is really strong. Freezing enemies is a very, very useful tool to have. But of course, I'm a bit weird, guys. I like to do things a little differently. I like to make it a bit more exciting. That's the orbs that he just picked up. Did you see them? That's what you have to shatter before you can flinch him and do some damage. And the Raging Bull stuns him really quickly. And this is the execution that steals his sword, and then I'm going to fly around and kill everybody else. As we take on the Slinky Jacko and the other Hattori that's knocking around. But I decided for the purpose of this playthrough that I wasn't going to go near that. I wasn't going to use the melee abilities too much. I wasn't going to crutch on them at all. And then every so often when I get a bit bored, I'll pull one out just to show you that it can be done. But I want to make this very clear for the people who are like, why would you do that? You don't have to do that. And I would 100% recommend that you don't. This is one of the hardest fights in the game, this. Reaching the Dragon's Nest, this encounter, is very long. It is awkwardly balanced, awkwardly paced, and it has a phase around towards the latter half of it where it spawns in a bunch of the djinns and they can instantly wipe you, which is really frustrating. Because there's about 3 spawns here. It's quite laboured, it's quite long, it's quite boring. It's not a very good environment in my opinion. And then once you do the boring start bit with the Shogun lasers and the tons of jobbers and the Hattoris, they send those djinns at you and sometimes they just wipe you immediately. This fight did, however, lead me to the idea that you do not have to run around and kind of just do combat balls to the wall the whole time. Because what you want to do here if you're struggling, and I died a couple times on this fight, I didn't die on many fights, but this one I did. What you want to try here, guys, is I like to kill everything in the area except for one of the Hattoris, and I like to save up all of my glory juice. And then, when there's only one Hattori left, steal his sword. When you steal his sword, it will spawn the next wave of enemies, and you can use his ability to fly between all the genies and just smash them into the earth. And then after that, it's just a couple more of the suicide spawns, and you'll do this sequence like it was effortless. But be very careful of these guys, that when you see this many Hattoris like this, they are fast, they do a lot of damage, and they have great mobility. So you want to be very, very, very conscious of where they are, because these guys will kill you really quickly. And they're easily one of the hardest parts of the game, Their weakness is, if you steal their weapon, you kill all of them. But if you steal this guy's health, you'll overfill your HP bar, and now I have 152 HP, which is really strong as well. And I'm going to talk about that because I've not mentioned it. So if you're struggling with this game, guys, build up the glory juice and then kill the standard jobbers. If you kill the standard jobbers when you have the glory kill, they will often overfill your HP. And if you can get 200 HP, there's almost no fight in this game where you're going to struggle too much with if you constantly keep filling that back up. And because they infinitely spawn while you're fighting, as long as you have the ability to build that resource, and you build that resource by getting headshots and killing people, it's a gold orb that they drop. There might even be pickups in the level where you can pick it up. And all you do is you cycle the fodder, keep circling around the map, getting away from the danger, kite the danger, kill the fodder, build that meter, and then get your life back and then go back in. It's very boring, it's not a good way to play. I don't think the game should be even remotely designed around that idea, but it is incredibly lame and effective. And if you ever struggle in any of these fights, slow it down, build up your glory meter by killing fodder, and then just isolate and destroy. It might take 10 minutes instead of 2, but you will do it and you won't have to worry about it. And I think that this fight would have been more fun if everything was out at the same time. I don't like staggered spawns. I don't like multiple waves. I don't like feeling like I've been fighting for 20 fucking minutes because I can't kill everything because I'm getting constantly jobbered up and losing HP, and if I overextend I die. I would rather face the blender face on with everything coming at me than this. He has 20 Hattoris, and then when they die he has 20 fucking genies, and then after that when they die he has 20 suicide bombers. That to me is just, that's some like fucking Eternal Legend garbage, and I'm not interested in it. And that's no, shade to Eternal Legend. That is an awesome piece of content there. But it's not my style, wave after wave after wave after wave after wave. If I wanted that, I'd do the Dark Realm in Onimusha, But that's not who I am right now. I've already done that shit. I did that on the PS2. I want something else. So this to me is not the most engaging. And admittedly, you can do this in a more engaging manner and more power to you, but I'm trying to show you a strategy here that's safe, because I did die a couple times playing too crazy. And if I'm struggling, then other people might struggle too. And it's always a good idea to tailor your strategies to the most people possible if you can. But the tangent that will never end and never be completed, this idea of a player being frustrated, it's so interesting, isn't it? The idea of frustration being a motivator, frustration being a fuel. Here it is, see this? Boom. As soon as they spawn, as soon as you see the genies flying, kill this guy. And then just fly around and kill all of them, like this. And if you look right now, do you see how the screen looks all super red like I'm dying? This is really misleading if you ask me, because it makes me think that I'm on the verge of losing and I'm not. So it gives me essentially a false horizon of pressure and anxiety that I don't need to feel. And that to me is bad design. That should be a different colour. I think that should have gone black and white, and then all the blood should be a shocking red. They could have gone into like a Kurosawa mode, a Kurosawa vignette filter, and it would have been sick as fuck. But instead, it makes you feel like you're dying, this plaster the jam on the screen, and it's, in my opinion, bad design. And there's a lot of bad design in this game. The HUD, I fucking hate. I don't know if anybody else is with me here, guys. I hate the HUD being on the bottom left. Every piece of information that you need in this game shows up on the bottom left. All the health you get back, all the bloody glory juice that you get for your finisher, all your bars, your HP, your chi, your ammo, everything's on the bottom left. Can you name a single fucking game that uses bottom left for all that information? Because I can't. This has been standardized, dude. Why is it like this? Why isn't the HP bar in the top left? Why isn't the ammunition in the bottom right? Why is it like this? Every time I come back to the game, I get mad salty. And I just don't understand it. It seems super fucking weird to me. And it's one of those things, I think Flying Hog, the developers, I think it's just one of the ways that they like doing it, but to me it's wrong. My eyes want to look in different places. It's like when I play Battlefield after coming off of Call of Duty and the minimap's in the wrong corner. Like, it doesn't feel natural. It doesn't feel like a standardized feature as it should be. There are so many aspects of video games that have become slowly standardized and you don't even realize it. And then when you play a game like this and it's got this finisher thing popping up in the middle of the screen, which I'm okay with things in the middle of the screen, I can read those and play. But when I have to look at the bottom left to see fucking sundry information, I start getting a bit mad annoyed with that shit. I don't want that. And luckily, in these shooters, a lot of the information, like, you don't look in the bottom left for your HP bar. I don't really mind about that. Because I know on a shooter when I'm dying, usually, outside of the times in this game when your screen goes red for no reason. This is a tough fight as well. This is quite difficult. It's got Hattoris, it's got the Slinky Jackus, and it's got the Jins as well. So take the sword, kill the flyers immediately if you can, and you should be okay. But it's meddling and confusing when it comes to visual language, and visual language should always be clear. There's a reason why in the DLC for Doom Eternal, they added all the important utilities to your reticle, because it's a much more natural place for it, and it feels a bit weird at first to get used to it, but once you get used to it, it feels like it was always designed that way. It's a very clever way of doing UI design, and I think the UI in this game is... I like how it's minimalist, I like how there's only a bunch of things in the bottom left and there's nothing else really outside of a couple of challenge pop-ups, but I don't like where it's put. The information to me is, it's too isolated. Like, I'm not looking for a kill feed in a multiplayer. I'm looking for little bits of information when I'm playing, and I feel like you have to go out of your way to find them, so it's definitely one of my critiques of the game. And I only have a few critiques of the game when it comes to the bad design angles, but they're the ones that stand out the most. And the big one for me is the grapple. I don't know if you felt it too, but when you play Shadow Warrior 2, I feel like I can move really fast in Shadow Warrior 2. I feel like when I'm chaining jump dashes, and I'm not stuck on something, because collision in that game was a nightmare, but if you give me those jump dash, I will do beautiful things in that game, and I will fly. I will never touch the ground. I will constantly be a threat. I will be dealing death at Mach speeds. And then when you grapple in this game, it's this weird canned animation, which Sutton from my stream said that it's not an animation, it's a cutscene, and he's right. He really is. You press grapple on something expecting a very tangible, very physical, very visceral experience of boosting forward and getting out of dodge, and you get this... It's the strangest thing, dude. It feels like the fucking jacked shot from Final Fantasy X. You jump up, you like reach your arm back, you stick your knee up in the air like some pitcher, and then boom, you hook, and then you slowly swing, and it's like the whole thing. By the end of the thing, my family's already left me. You know, I'm already an alcoholic. I'm already in Las Vegas, and I am definitely focused on leaving it. And it's just absurd to me how you can make a grapple, which is such a cool idea and could be so complementary for movement, and then you make it so fucking slow that it's a horrible tool to use. And the irony is, it's the safest way to play, but it's the most boring way to play in a game that's meant to be exciting. And I don't understand that. I really don't. If you want to, guys, you can grapple, shoot a monster, grapple, while you're midair, shoot a monster, grapple, shoot a monster, grapple, shoot a monster, and every fight will take 50 minutes, but you'll never die, because nothing can really hurt you, because no one has an answer for it. It's completely horrible to do, and totally awful, and I don't recommend it, but you can do that. And then here we have the Ancient Cock boss, which is really, really funny, because the first phase on this can be absolutely deleted by just slash-cancelling the Raging Bull and killing him super fast. And then when the second phase starts, both the torso is going to be charging you, and the lower legs will be charging you, and the torso will be trying to hit you with the magic. And you just do the same thing. You just refill your ammunition, and then you burst them down. And then they're going to simulate a bunch of platforms into the sky, and you have to jump on those and then get to them, and it triggers a cutscene. But be really careful here, guys. I died on this fight, believe it or not. Everything was going fine. I was kicking their ass. And then when it got to the phase where he jumps up and spawns the platforms, as he jumped, he killed me. It's like there was a piece of weird detection on it. It's like when you hit that lift and it comes down, and if you're underneath it, it squashes you. I got squashed by some scripting of some sort. And the checkpoint is at the beginning of the fight. You don't get any respite at all between the bars. So you have to do it all again. Fortunately, the fight is really simple. Every move he has can be dodged in a certain way. Most of it, you can just keep spamming side dodge and jumping and you'll be fine. This laser can be jumped over. You can double jump. That's a ground shockwave, so make sure you jump over it. And then you have the charge that he does, which you can just side dodge as well. The most difficult move is when he kicks the fireballs at you. And when he does that, they have really big radius on them, but you can still dodge them and jump them and whatnot. You might even be able to cut them with the sword, which I didn't try, but there's a lot of features in Shadow Warrior 2 that aren't in this game, which I find a crying shame, really. There was a taunt in Shadow Warrior 2. I think when you press reload, when you used it on the sword, you could parry attacks. And I don't know if the sword has parry in this, because I did neglect it a decent amount, but I feel like they stripped away a lot of features that made Shadow Warrior 2 so interesting, and that game is super misaligned. People don't really like Shadow Warrior 2 that much, but I thought it was really, really interesting and really cool. But now we move on to an auto-scrolling level, and there's a couple of barrels in the water here that you have to shoot. The difficulty of this mission is that it's broken up in such a way you spend a lot of time not doing much. And because I want to trim out all the downtime in this and only have the areas where you might face opposition, I'm going to be removing a lot of these sequences. And you spend this whole level, I think, chasing an egg, which is pretty cool and a pretty fun idea. One of the things I haven't mentioned about this game is how colourful it is, and how I love that. I really do. You know, I can critique it on the foundation of its difficulty. I can critique it on its HUD. I can critique it on its grapple hook and whatnot. But one area that I think it absolutely smashes it is that it constantly keeps the colours vibrant. It constantly keeps putting you in places that are really, really interesting to look at and really stimulating on the eye. And as much as I would have loved to go to a city or a town like it did in the second game, you can get some city streets and some rooftops and things. I'm really glad that they stuck to this almost fantastical aesthetic, because they didn't need to, but they definitely hooked it and nailed it. There's only one level I don't like, and it's the level that is the stereotypical we're inside a monster level that every video game has had for the last 30 years, which is the Inside the Dragon, which is the final level of the game. It's actually the most difficult level of the game as well, with the most difficult encounters in it outside of, you know, one or two tough ones. But there's also an Oni Hammer here, so be careful of him, he'll fuck you up, he's really dangerous. And then just a bunch of the Kagatsu guys, the puppet dudes. Or Kugutsu, sorry, I pronounced that incorrectly. But that gets you the 200 HP. This guy's going to fire some projectiles at you, which is really kind. If these weapons were more hit scan, this game would be a lot more terrifying. But most of it is very well balanced and very fair. I think it's interesting that this company released this game and at the same time are working on a completely new IP where it seems like all the studio heads and all the big dicks are on. And this must have been started by the big dicks, got into a state of like decency and functionality, and then left to the people to finish, left to the younger developers to get it out the door and whatnot. And maybe that can explain why there's aspects of it on a polish degree and on like a mechanical degree that aren't quite as good as they could be, because the major components of the team were working on that new Wild West game. Which I find really interesting, because if this is this developer kind of utilizing the B team once the A team has established it, I think that that's really encouraging, because they did a great job with this game and a lot of the problems with it can be fixed over time and probably and hopefully will be. Whereas you can't fix people that don't know what they're doing, you know, you can't really fix people that don't understand good design or indeed champion bad design. You can't really fix Yoko Taro, and nor should you, because people love that guy. And it's that interesting question then, isn't it? It's like the pop idol shows, the American Idols, the talent competitions where you go on there and great singers go on those shows and they get told that, you know, you're a bit flat or you're a bit this or you're a bit that, and it doesn't really resonate with them because what they want is a very homogenized, focused and, you know, manufactured sound. And because they're looking for this really, really specific sound, if you were to take any of the great singers of our generations and put them on those shows, they would have been insulted and probably voted off. And then there comes a point, doesn't there? You know, when you're musically capable, when you can hit a tone and keep a tune and, you know, you've got pitch and things, at that point, can anybody truly tell you that what you're doing isn't music? Because isn't the entire definition of music is that it's meant to make you feel something, it's meant to come from inside? Just if you don't like it, doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad, right? And there's a difference between something being technically bad and mechanically bad. Like, nobody wants to listen to somebody on karaoke who can't even sing in tune, unless it's really funny and you enjoy that kind of schadenfreude. But at the same time, some people will enjoy somebody who has a very distinct voice, whereas a lot of other people won't, because they don't like the voice. This is interesting, because this environment could be really sick, and I spend most of it falling off. But this is encouraging for people who are struggling with the game, because if I can fall off like 40 times and lose all my HP to the fact that there's gaps between that fucking boat, then you should be able to do this effortlessly, right? Just don't fall off. Be a good player, unlike me. And just keep on kicking ass and having fun. But a couple of things as well in this playthrough that I've not touched on that I'll mention now before I forget. This is a pseudo-challenge run, in as much that I'm doing a stipulation that I've done now for a long time that you might already be aware of, you might already have noticed, or you might be curious of the absence of it so far in the playthrough. And that absence is, I do not do HP upgrades. And it's something that I recommend you do as well if you want to enjoy a game and get a better experience with it. Because video games now, when it comes to skill trees, every video game has a skill tree. You know this. You've played modern video games. This is a tough fight as well, but you can use the traps really well here. You also want to use the environment if you can, because there's some really cool stuff going on. Look how many of these dudes there is. The Oni Hanmas. These guys are super dangerous, but they all fall into the pit, which is what makes this a really interesting and dynamic encounter. This is one of the more interesting encounters in the game because it's quite claustrophobic, but it has this massive universal equalizer, which is that trap in the middle. However, the most dangerous part of this fight is not anything on the ground, it's these guys. This genie dude is by far the scariest enemy in this game. And if you play on the other difficulties, you won't even remember his name. I mean, you won't remember his name anyway, because it's kind of awkward. He's called a Seeking Sikora, right? I remembered his name and just completely disproved my own point. But, you know, it's that kind of enemy that you just kill him. I didn't even remember these genie dudes being bitches. And then I played on hardcore, and they legitimately killed me more than anyone else. And I think that that's a good idea, that they've made them dangerous. I just disagree on how they're dangerous. And I disagree with an enemy being that dangerous and being thrown at you 5 deep. And the weird part about them is they're kind of random too. There's times where they don't do anything. They just kind of sit around and like belly dance and shit. And then there's other times where it's like you just insulted their old mother and she's died, you know? You went to their mother's funeral and spat in the urn, and then they all come and fucking kill you immediately. And there doesn't seem to be any middle ground with them. They're either hyper-aggressive or hyper-passive, which maybe that's just part of their design. Maybe it's a proximity thing. And admittedly, I don't know this game very well. I've only played it twice. And truth be told, I won't play it too much more. And it's just because I like Shadow Warrior 2. And this game kind of makes me sad in a weird way. I think it's a great game, and I think it's really, really fun, and you'll have a good time with it. But it reminds me of what I wanted and what I didn't get. And I don't know if you have a game like that where it's not a bad game in any way, but it's just a different type of game than what you wanted. Like, look at this dude showing me his balls and shit. He's trying to teabag me in midair. He's loving it. I've got no ammo as well. This is really interesting. I keep trying to swap weapons to stuff, but I just don't have the shit I'm trying to swap to. Which I suppose I should talk about power-ups as well. I didn't finish my upgrade tangent, which I'm going to, don't worry guys. I'm kind of all over the place as usual. But there are pickups in this area that you have to monitor because they've changed the cooldowns on them and they've changed the respawn rate on hardcore. So if you look over there, you can see that blue one, that's an ammo pickup. There's these flower buds that are HP pickups, and then one of them that you'll find, or maybe you'll just find it ambiently, is the gold orbs that fall out of the enemies, which is of course the stuff that gives you the ability to finish them. And I don't know if this difficulty is different to the other ones in that regard, but it feels like you don't get that much finisher juice unless you really kill everything in the fucking room, which seems kind of weird to me if they're trying to do the glory kill aesthetic, because you generally don't have enough of that juice to glory kill everything unless you play in a very boring way that I do not recommend, which tells you that the cadence and the rhythm of this game is not the same as Eternal. You know, it's not about using the glory kills to get yourself out of a bad situation or using them to refill on some resources. And a lot of the times in Doom Eternal, you get to the point where you're so good that you don't even use the glory kills that often outside of very specific situations because you just kill things quicker, you know? You get the resources by doing fun things with the flame belch and the frost grenade and normal grenades and things, you know? But in this game, you do have to kind of move around and pick a lot of stuff up, and you want to get into the habit of being cognizant of where the HP pickups are and where the ammo pickups are, just in case. You can use your sword to get ammo back off enemies, especially the fodder, and it's a good habit to get into. And you can also use the Chi Blast, I think, to give you a little bit too. So there are tools that if you're paying attention and you're quite aware during a battle, you can use them to your advantage and have a lot of fun. But every so often you might forget to do it, you know, you might not be in the swing of doing it really frequently. And that's where the pickups really come in handy. So knowing where they are is super effective. And then here we have a bunch of, that's a Hattori with the Oni Hanmas. And then we've got more Hattoris. And I think there was a Slinky Jacko here, but I think he died pretty quickly, or he's running away somewhere. So lots of dudes doing their things. And we've got to shut them down and stop them from doing it. And we have so many traps that it's going to make this very, very easy. This is also the level where I got the soft lock as well, guys, where I stopped playing when the game first came out, which was super frustrating. And I hope you don't get the same experience, because this is a fun game. It should be played. It's got some pretty harsh reviews on Steam, and I don't really agree with them, even though I'm not going to tell you it's the best game in the world. I think there's a lot of fun here, and I think that video games right now are in a pretty dark place for a player such as myself for what I'm looking for. And this is not what I'm looking for. Although I really love the idea of Doom Eternal clones, and I'd love to see 50 more of them. This might not be what I want, but that does not mean I'm not going to enjoy it, and I'm not going to appreciate the fact it exists. Because I absolutely do. And let's talk about the upgrades now again. So, I have a habit of not using HP upgrades in games to make the game a bit more difficult so that I can have a bit more fun with it and feel like I'm more engaged. And I did the exact same thing here, guys. There's an entire skill tree on Lo Wang where you can, like, I don't even know the skills. I've not looked at it that much, but it's something to do with getting life back and having more HP and having, is it ki that regenerates quicker? I don't have any of those, guys. I don't have HP back when I Chi Blast. I don't have pretty much any of the things that you can use to give you that passive earning of HP. And it's mostly because I like to focus on the damaging aspects of a skill tree. And it does frustrate me a little bit, and I don't know if you're the same here. Most games now have skill trees, as I mentioned, and the skill trees are so fucking boring. There's not a single skill on them that you want. You look at these skill trees, you read them, and it's like you're reading a bus timetable in some train station somewhere, waiting to connect to something else. And it feels so unengaging and so needless, but they do it out of habit and ritual more so than actual function and need and necessity. And I don't like doing things that aren't out of necessity when it comes to that. Why design your game around every other game and then have absolutely no aspirations or ambition in the things that you're ripping off? That to me just sounds really confusing. But you'd be surprised how many games do it because, you know, they want the sandbox, they want the open world, they want the co-op, they want this, they want that, they want the carrot on the stick, they want the endorphins, they want the microtransactions, they want all of these isms that they're going to add to things and add to schemes to enable their game to hopefully do better than it would have done if it was a more, you know, narrow-minded, focused vision. But most of the players that I talk to and a lot of my friends, we're not looking for a game that does everything. We're not looking for this crazy jack of all trades because, as you know, when you're a jack of all trades, you're a master of none. And is a master of none really all that great outside of a TV show if you like that sense of humour? Probably not. We want more focused, more highly specific, more niche games because they scratch a very particular itch, they focus on one thing, they do it really well, and then you get something special instead of something focusing on nothing and you don't get anything. And it leads to this frustrating video game crash that will inevitably turn up because everything's trying to be this delivery system for a structure of consumption and consumerism that has almost nothing to do with video games and everything to do with the endorphin part of your brain. And it's disappointing when the art is there to solicit endorphins and microtransactions rather than the quest of the art itself and the joy of doing it and the joy of receiving it. But luckily, thanks to the wonderful wide variety in the world, there are still opportunities for that to happen in its natural form, and that's where the indie scene comes through, doing things that are passion projects, that are interesting, that are challenging boundaries and doing new things and focusing on one thing that's really niche and fringe and awesome. But skill trees are a dime a dozen. You've seen them, they're already tired, they've been tired for a long time, they need to be put out round the back of the shed, both barrels, see you later, buried somewhere, boys to men at the funeral, and move on. But we won't get that because they're too lucrative for the grindy, more, you know, the person who imprints and conditions themselves into the formulaic necessity for doing the same things, repeating the same functions for the incremental increase, which is a redundant sentence, isn't it? Incremental increase. I guess it kind of works. But the person that likes to see numbers slowly rising by repeating a said action, those are who skill trees are for now. And once again, I do find it quite funny that that's the person that most skill trees are aimed at, the guy that lacks the imagination to do anything but number crunch like some kind of, you know, dead inside accountant. When these people who love that stuff have games that do that stuff better than anything else. Like, if you like ridiculous stats, if you like spreadsheets filled with abilities and icons and cooldowns and passives, you play Path of Exile. You play Grim Dawn, right? I think it's called. Those games, they've got skill trees longer than my life. It's ridiculous, and they do it really well, and they're in games that are really fun that people love. People have thousands of hours on those games, and they're proud of it. Nobody says, oh, I've got like 2,000 hours in Path of Exile, I'm ashamed. Everybody's like, dude, I've got 3,000 hours in that game, it's awesome. Everybody loves it, and they all go like, Season 1 was better, it was better before they did this and that and this and that, and they balanced this and they balanced that and this, and all these terms you've never heard of. But what's the one universal factor? They're always excited. I don't think I've ever spoken to anybody that got deep into Path of Exile that doesn't at least appreciate how much they once loved it, even if they don't love it now. That game elicits beautiful memories from people of just super deep diving, data mining, really grinding that action RPG, like super strategic thing, builds upon builds upon builds. Like, it's ludicrous. So, why am I playing fucking Peggle and they're forcing a skill tree on me that's like 1/50th of the caliber of the Path of Exile? And it's just, it doesn't work. It doesn't work, and I don't know who it's for. And it leads to, you spend that time, don't you? You look at the skill tree, you read a few of the abilities. This heals me, I'm not using it. This brings back my magic, I'm not using it. This makes me a bigger pussy, I'm not using it. This enables me to clean my vagina of all the sand that might get in it when I'm cowering under a stone, I'm not using it. Like, 95% of most skill trees are super frustrating to a player like myself. Ooh, this is a new enemy. This is the Guruma. And that sounds like some kind of strange groomer, doesn't it? What's he doing? Is he like a child groomer? Is he a predator? Who is this? Go get Chris Hansen. But this guy is... I thought he was called a chef, but I think he's called a chief. And he kind of sits around looking all gangly, looking a bit like Anima, who's just become homeless, and everything he owns he put into like a pressure cooker and then went on the road, like at the end of the Incredible Hulk, when that sad song plays. But this guy just kind of chills out, spitting out these weird proximity bombs, and that's all he does. He's got a boatload of HP, so you really have to hurt him to kill him. But as far as the danger goes, he kind of just does his own thing. He's the dude in GoldenEye that sits in one room and sticks proxy mines on every entrance and then waits for you to come to him. That's who that guy is. So just kill him, steal his weapon, and use his awesome grenade. But we've got these skill trees that are just transparent beige IKEA furniture, you know? Like the most accessible, universal, non-threatening, you know, non-challenging, non-fringe, non-creative, even though, you know, IKEA is quite creative. But you've got this, it's just generic brand, isn't it? It's generic brand cereal that tastes like shit, even though some generic brand cereal tastes godlike and better than the official stuff. You know, it's a difficult conversation to have this because there's always counter-arguments, but we've got these skill trees that just don't do it. And then the best part, which I think you'll all agree, guys, is when the skill tree does do it, you have to buy 50 skills you don't want to get to the one you do want. Which is my biggest pet peeve in skill trees in all games. Why do I have to buy 4 different flavoured condoms to get to the point where some lady will touch my penis? I just don't understand it, you know? What am I doing? Am I going hiking? Am I a sailor? Like, what is this? It's the strangest habit that they've formed in the archetype of this mechanic that is just parroted into ad infinitum, ad nauseum, you know? Why is it that we get so many elements just regurgitated, and there's maybe one thing that's worthwhile and meaningful and interesting, and you have to get 5 things to get to it that you don't want? And there's an example of it in Shadow Warrior as well. There's a weapon in this game which is, I forget the name of it, but it's the saw blade shooting gun. No, it's not the saw blade shooting gun, sorry, it's the Basilisk. So the Basilisk in this game is kind of like the Ballista from Doom, only instead of firing a really, really powerful thing, you have to charge a shot and fire. The first upgrade on that weapon slows down time when you're shooting it. I don't want that. I don't want to slow down time, guys. I want to react faster. I want to aim in real time. I want to get good, you know? I want to be the person that can aim between 2 guys mid-swing and shoot them really quickly and then swap weapons and do all of that. I don't want the game to slow down to enable me to do that. I don't want to look at my hands when I'm typing. And that's what that is. That's the video game equivalent of exactly doing that. You're somebody that knows how to touch type, you have the ability, but you habitually stare at your keyboard because you just can't help yourself, because it's there. This is a really cool fight, this as well. This is probably my favourite fight in the game. It's just a really claustrophobic room with all kinds of stuff going on, and it doesn't overstay its welcome if you treat it right, which I really enjoy. It's a nice burst fire of intensity, and it's got a lot of fodder, it's got a lot of danger, but it is pretty cool. But I'd love to upgrade the Basilisk. It's one of my favourite weapons. It's a weapon I can't imagine not using. It's so good. But I will never get those upgrades because I have to buy that first one that slows down time. And when you gatekeep your abilities behind shitty abilities, all it does is make a player resent what those abilities are, and it resents the way that you've sculpted your skill tree. It's the same thing in any kind of RPG where somebody does some random quest they didn't mean to do, they find some random dungeon, they go through the trials and the ardour of beating a dungeon that's way higher level than them, they have no right to succeeding, but they're a good player and they're stubborn and they're just challenged enough that they can do it. And then at the end they get this super cool sword, but it's 25 levels higher than them and they can't use it. And then by the time they get 25 levels higher, that sword is no longer good, and they've got 50 other swords that are better than it. And you can't tell me right now, guys, that this is not an experience that you've felt, because we've all felt it. It happens all the time. I don't understand why it still happens, you know? Why have we got to the point where we're still hoarding loot we can't wear because of level restrictions, only to then for it to become completely obsolete when we can wear it? It just, where's the fun in that? And I suppose the counter-argument can be, oh, it's a balance conceit, it's to make sure the game's not too easy. But you know, when you play these games, there's so many ways to make them easy if you want to. It reminds me of the critique of Dark Souls when it comes to balance. You know, when people talk about Elden Ring and they talk about, oh, you can't do that because of balance reasons, and then you say, but what about Mimic Tier? What about pre-patch Moonveil? What about pre-patch Knight of Sword and Flame? What about pre-patch like Comet Azure? Are you really going to talk to me about balance when you can kill bosses in one hit? Easily? With no skill and no need to dodge? You want to really talk balance? Like, it shuts itself down, doesn't it? It's really strange. These Slinky Jackoos are so funny, dude. They're one of those enemies where I love how they look and I love the idea of them, but I don't really understand what they do. They kind of just run away. You know, they run away, they put environmental hazards in a few places, and then they inevitably lose to you. It's that feeling of Darth Maul, isn't it? Darth Maul, coolest character ever, but destined to fail. I apologise if you hear a dog barking, guys. I've got my window open for this commentary because it's quite quiet where I live. But there's this one dog that every so often just... he's not having a good time, and he's letting you know, you know? This is really hectic as well. Look how crazy this is. This is a fun fight, this one. I got no HP, there's mines everywhere, I don't have the ability to do a glory kill, and now I have to run the gambit of picking up HP without being immediately killed on the next thing that kills me. And going back to the skill tree conversation, guys, and going back to the upgrade conversation of I avoid upgrades that make the game easier when it comes to personal defense and personal like HP and survivability. I prefer damage and my offense. I prefer to be a glass cannon than a tank. And one of the abilities in this game is something called, I think, Final Stand or one more stand or something. There is a defensive feature that a lot of games have that this game has given a name. And it's the idea that when you get down to low HP, you get this invulnerability phase where the enemies pacify a little bit. And you cannot be killed. And it enables you to run away and kind of recoup and figure out what's going on and get back in the fight. And previously, on the other difficulties before they came up with hardcore, this phase lasted a long time. It was quite long, apparently. I don't truly remember it, but it was much longer than it is now, and that's one of the things that hardcore does to make you a bit more vulnerable. And I can confirm that when you're running in that phase and you've got no life and you're looking for some HP, every so often you'll just keel over and die because something will hit you. And you can be jumping, you can be dashing, you can be swinging, you can be wall running, and you'll still die. Because the game is, you know, pretty good at killing you sometimes every so often. And there's upgrades that make it a more viable option. They make that survivability in that mode a lot better, and they're probably useful upgrades. But of course, I'm not using them, and I choose not to use them. Because to me, guys, I don't need to seek difficulty by doing permadeath, by doing Iron Man runs, by being frustrated, by some mechanic designed to frustrate me. That's shitty, that's cancer to me, I don't want that. I will happily do a restricted challenge run on a game that can be way harder if I make it harder, and can be way easier if I choose to make it easier. I would rather do that for the rest of time than have games designed to frustrate me in a type of difficulty that I think is lame. And the one thing the industry has got in spades right now is shitty difficulty. It is everywhere. There's so many examples of it, it's kind of tragic. And I always go back to the same ones when people ask me, well, what's an example of good difficulty, Chris? And I always go back to Shinji Mikami citations, you know. I always say, go play Vanquish on God Hard. Go see how that goes, you know. I always say, go play God Hand. In as much as I'm not a big fan of dynamic difficulty, but I think God Hand, as far as challenging goes, and as far as completely respecting the player and demanding them, I don't think there's a game that does it like that. Because it's fair, but you still die, you know. It reminds me of Ninja Gaiden Black in many ways. Because Ninja Gaiden Black doesn't have a lot of the insane scramble bullshit of Ninja Gaiden 2, where Ninja Gaiden 2 is a game that is cranked up to 15 trying to kill you every single second, whereas in Black the game is hard because you were a bit more limited as a character, but at the same time you're fighting against smaller numbers, and those numbers are more focused, but it leads to a much more elegant dance, I think. And that's the reason why I prefer Ninja Gaiden 1 over Ninja Gaiden 2, because I think that the difficulty is more restrained, I think it's more elegant. But I cite games like that, you know. I think those games are really good when it comes to difficulty. And a lot of people that talk about difficulty now, they've not really played those games. They've not really done those. And you see it a lot, don't you, on YouTube, people critiquing difficulty and talking about things, and they all bring it back to some game that they played in, like, 2020. And I don't know if that's a good idea or a bad idea. I don't know if that's a sign of the new generation, a sign of the new times. You know, maybe that's what I was doing 10 years ago, they're now doing now, and it's really important because they're an important voice, which is something I never was, you know. And that's cool if that's the case, but I don't know if it is. And there's a lot of YouTubers that you see that are talking about difficulty and analysing it and going into the merits of it. And I find myself a lot of the times watching a little bit of their videos, disagreeing fervently with them, and then just kind of turning them off. And usually when I disagree with somebody, I like to watch the rest of their argument. But a lot of the times I find the arguments so unfounded and uninteresting that I don't even finish the videos. And it's one of the reasons why, if you've ever asked me on stream about those critiques, people make these critique videos that are essays and they're 3 hours long, and they spend the first 2 hours saying fuck all, and the final hour sucking their own dick over what they didn't say. And I hate it. I hate this culture that has emerged around the Matthew Matosis format of, here's a guy that had something to say at a time where everybody wasn't saying it, and it was a necessary polemic stance. It was a necessary different perspective that was really refreshing, and I went on to really enjoy, even though I don't necessarily agree with Matthew on many things. I agree with where he's coming from and the sentiments, and I think that he put forward a really interesting argument in a time where people were just too willing to be yes men. But now, it's like people are coming out of the fucking woodwork just to be devil's advocate, and their argument is like, well, I like licorice. You don't like licorice, but I like licorice. And you're just like, what the fuck's the point in this? Why are you talking for 2 hours to tell me you like fucking licorice? There's no conversation here, there's no discussion, there's no debate. And then you look at the gameplay in the background of them playing, and they can't even play the games they're critiquing. And that's the thing that gets me, dude. You don't have to be the best player in the world to play a game. But I saw a tutorial once of somebody trying to tell me how to bunny hop. Sorry, not bunny hop, it was wall bounce. How to wall bounce in Gears of War, and he wasn't even doing it in the tutorial. You know when somebody makes a tutorial on a mechanic that they can't even do themselves? That's a bad tutorial. And this happens all the time, because that's the joy of YouTube, isn't it? You get to project yourself, you get to do what you want, you get to make your content. A word that has now been so sullied it barely means anything as I fall through the world here and fall off. Love it. This is a cool fight, though. I like this one. I don't like this level, though, because I got a softlock on this level, because the level refused to load because I did the platforming out of sequence. So, piece of advice here, guys. Whenever there's an opportunity to use a grapple hook and a wall run, do not get creative with the movement and circumvent any of it, because the level won't load, and you will be in a perpetual checkpoint of death. I got into a checkpoint where it kept dropping me onto a tree that had a sliding collision on it that just sent me into a void, and none of the world had populated. And it did that for about 30 seconds. I went and made a coffee and came back, and I was still dying on loop. So I had to restart this level again. And I got really lucky because this level's very short. But to say that I was pissed off that day was an understatement, because I kind of wanted this game to end so I could put it up and have something for when I go on holiday. Which in many ways is a terrible reason to make a YouTube video and a terrible reason to make a walkthrough. But we're in the climate of video games now where there's almost nothing worth covering, and everything you try and cover has got something fundamentally wrong with it that makes it less fun to even partake with, let alone record. And it happens all the time. The amount of guides in the last 3 years I've tried to make, and I've not even been able to finish the games casually because they're just one-trick ponies that weren't interesting to begin with. It's a ludicrous amount. And I was thinking about that the other day too. Like, what's the point in walkthroughs when there's nothing left to guide? And I've thought this for a while, and it makes me think of the people that were doing it before I was doing it and how they all kind of went away. And it makes you wonder, doesn't it, what's the natural life of a walkthrough maker? Is it reflective of the industry and reflective of the games, or is it reflective on the person's ability to adapt? Is it my obligation to adapt to video games that aren't enjoyable? Is it my obligation to adapt to video games that aren't difficult? You know, that barely have gameplay, that are so filled with gimmicks and marketing strategies that the gameplay that does exist is not worth my time even talking about, or at least learning to showcase to you guys how you could potentially get better. Like, where does the obligation lie? Is it my obligation to go backwards and look at when games were difficult, when games were mechanically rich and did have, you know, challenging skill ceilings and challenging learning curves? Is there no obligation at all? You know, is it just the natural ebb and flow of all things? Things live and things die. You know, it's an interesting question, isn't it? And the frustrating part for me is that I love making these videos, I do. You know, and in spite of the resonance not always being there, it's one of those things where I still enjoy the practice, I still enjoy the activity. And it must be that thing, you know, like when, for instance, if you're a wrestler or something, or you're a musician, and you start getting too old for it, where the mind is willing, but the body is slowing down and is less capable. Dude, I'm getting killed here. This is a rough start. And it's always the Jins. It's always these guys doing that ground move that hits you. They put like a bunch of bombs in front of you, a bunch of tripwires, and if you trip them, they do a lot of damage. I've also got the upgrade on the riot gun here that's the full auto. And I must say, guys, I've never used it until I did this guide. It is really good. You put this thing on and start pumping out those stuff, you swap to a rocket and things, you put out some serious pain. It's really, really fun. A super fun feeling. But it does isolate some issues with this game that I'm going to have to talk about again before I forget, which is the weapon variety. And I never thought I'd say this on a Shadow Warrior, but I'm about to. So I didn't play too much Shadow Warrior 1. I wasn't a big fan. I know that sounds crazy. I don't mean the original either. I've not played the original. The original looks kind of cool. It looks old school as hell and awesome. But the one that was made by this team, the first game was kind of linear, wasn't it? And it was kind of limited in many ways. And I played a couple levels, I got a bit bored. And the reason I got bored is because the movement. The thing that always draws me to Shadow Warrior 2 is it has some of the best movement of any game I've ever played. Like, oh wow, there's an interesting bug there with Kugutsu. I've not seen that. I don't even think I realised when I was playing. That was cool. But I think I like Shadow Warrior 2's movement more than I like Titanfall's movement. And I know that sounds crazy because Titanfall has legitimate bunny hopping and air strafing and you can move around everywhere with the wall running. But when it comes to the movement when you get into a gunfight, outside of drive-bying people using that movement, you just kind of aid strafe and maybe jump a little bit, don't you? It's very conventional. Whereas because Shadow Warrior 2 is more of a single-player experience, the movement in that game is just crazy jump dashing everywhere. And you don't need to be in full momentum from a wall run inherited into a slide hop to carry that speed. So in that game, you have access to the speed and you generate the speed at will by pressing a button. And I think that that's what makes that game so infectious to me, so addictive. And I love that movement choice. So a lot of my frames of reference and a lot of my contrast when I'm speaking in this come from my adoration of the second game. In spite of the second game having, you know, some really valid weaknesses with there was way too much gear in that game and way too many drops and way too many stats and way too many things to go through. Like, you could spend 2 hours in Shadow Warrior 2 just dismantling things that you could put into your weapons because it was very RPG based and it really went deep and there was a lot of stuff there you could sink your teeth into. It was the complete opposite of the problem that I talked about with the skill trees, where skill trees are usually so fucking boring, why read them? Whereas in Shadow Warrior 2, everything was so fascinating and so unique and so overpowered and so cool that you read it all. And some people just didn't like that. It's not very first-person shooter, it's very hybrid. This is one of the hardest fights in the game, this, and there's also a new enemy. This new enemy is a Gassi Obarion, and it's essentially just this big fat winged cherub creature that has double Gatling guns on its arms. And if you can fill up your finisher bar and kill him, you can steal his Gatling guns and then just shoot everybody else in the room and absolutely decimate. But the reason that this fight is long and difficult is because the environment is kind of awkward and there's multiple phases. And what I'm going to do here again, guys, is this is a fight where I died about, I think, 2 or 3 times before I did it. And that doesn't help as well, does it? Falling off like a moron. But the strategy here will involve manipulating the spawns so that I can kind of keep it pacified and continually be building a finisher. And that way, I've always got the backup of not having to worry about getting instantly melted down when the phases transition and the new waves come in. So I'm going to intentionally go around the environment here, headshotting the fodder, the Kugutsus, and I'm going to get their orbs and their life, and I'm going to keep myself constantly stocked up. And every so often I'm going to shoot at the main threat over here, this guy, and then as the spawns happen, I'm going to have the leniency to kill them how I need to, and then get back into this loop of killing fodder, staying safe, staying ahead of the curve and ahead of the dangerous elements, and then just isolating and destroying. But just be very careful. This is really noticeably difficult compared to some of the encounters. And unless you've got some kind of crazy strat that comes together, like just right now, you can die right here just because of the Oni Hanma and because of all the Djinns. You just get immediately bursted down and unlucky, and you can't get out, you get collided on, you're dead. And if you're having a super huge amount of issue here, feel free to execute one of the jobbers and get your life up to 200 and keep your life high, and that way there's just nothing they can do. You'll constantly be able to at least do one execution, and you can just keep cycling the jobbers, and the game becomes essentially unlosable then. You become unkillable. I don't recommend it personally, because I think there should always be a risk of death and there should always be the temptation of losing. But for instance, if you want to do that permadeath mode, it's the best way to stay alive. And it gives you the best backup. And on permadeath, you do everything you can to survive. I change all my rules for that shit because I don't like it. But as I was saying, Shadow Warrior 2 had a lot of things going for it, in spite of its, procedurally generated levels and how the enemies were all kind of random and something was picked from here, something was picked from there, and they all kind of fed into this system that generated their attributes that made them weak and strong and vice versa. But what it did do really well, which I thought was superb, was its weapon variety. So there were presets, archetypes in Shadow Warrior 2. There was your melee weapons, there was your rocket launchers, your submachine guns, your pistols, you had your shotguns, you had your rockets, your grenades, your like heavy machine gun / minigun stuff. You had pretty much any archetype or preset of firearm you can think of. And then within that preset, there was at least 5 to maybe 8 different variants of what you could use. And the really cool thing about them is, outside of what they looked like and a couple of, beginning statistics, you could sculpt and shift and change what those weapons did. So you could completely, essentially tailor them to what you wanted to achieve. You weren't, trapped into using a certain pistol because it was just better than the other pistols. You could map your pistol to work for you and then pick the one you thought looked coolest. And to me, I think that's a wonderful way of doing it, and you don't see it that often. So you notice when you come to this game has like 8 weapons, 7 weapons, which is quite a lot in the grand scheme of things, If you play a Halo game, you carry 2 the whole game, you're bored as fuck. You swap them around a little bit, because there is lots of weapons, but fundamentally, run around with 2 weapons, bored as fuck. Hate that design, always have hated it, blame Halo to the bone for doing that, literally ruined shooters for the longest time. Like, I want Infinite pockets, I want fucking Quake pockets, I want Doom pockets, I want Duke Nukem pockets, I want Unreal pockets, I want Mary Poppins bag. I don't want 2 fucking guns. 2 guns is the Antichrist when it comes to ruining the franchise known as a creative arena-esque first-person shooter. So when you come to this, you have this revolver, which is your pistol. There's nothing else. You have the submachine guns, which is this submachine gun. Nothing else. 1 shotgun. 1 rocket launcher. 1 everything. So it's a lot more traditional. It's a lot closer to potentially Shadow Warrior 1 than it is to Shadow Warrior 2. And of course, there's two instances of this now. This did it, Shadow Warrior 1 potentially did it. So there are more instances of Shadow Warrior doing that than there are doing the thing I like. But the thing I like resonates with me because I think it's really creative and it enables you to essentially do what you do in Souls, which is Fashion Souls. You pick the weapon that you like because the movesets are shared. So if you want to use a straight sword, you might not necessarily want to use a long sword, you might want to use a fancy sword like the blood sword. So that's what you do, right? You get a serrated sword that's Sword of Thorns, something like that. You pick on something that is obscure and cool and makes you feel good, and it has the exact same moveset as the bog standard one. And you can avoid using the meta, you can avoid using what everyone else is using, because you can twist it to your measures and what you want and service your own needs, which I think is super important. And this drives you into that creative valley known as player expression. Whereas in this game, it is very much more that Doom Eternal lilt, isn't it? It's, for better and for worse, massively inspired by what id are doing. Whereas even id kind of figured that out as well and gave you some deviations from that system. They give you a little bit of variety, not a lot. There's 2 different shotguns, but those 2 different shotguns have got vastly different functions. And the thing where I think Doom Eternal really elevates itself over this is that they also have secondary functions. And then they have tertiary functions because you choose between 2 presets. So you have a weapon that does one thing, And then you have these wonderful secondary features that you can choose to customize to how you want to play. So one weapon in Doom all of a sudden becomes potentially 3 weapons depending on how you utilize it. And this game does have some alternate functions that you can generate, but most of them tend to be passives. Like, the most interesting one, I think, is the weapon that fires the saws, because you can hold the button and fire 3 of them at the same time, which is a bit more interesting than just firing 1. But you lose the variety, you lose that breadth of interesting things to interact with. You know, look at something like the ballista. The ballista in this game is this weapon that you're seeing right now. It is a very, very strong weapon known as the basilisk, and it looks amazing. But it kind of does one thing. It does one thing. It's a charged cannon. You know, it's a charge rifle from Titanfall 1. It does a big damage, a big chunk, and if you charge it, you get rewarded for your accuracy. But then think about the ballista. In Doom Eternal, the ballista has the Destroyer Blade, which is this massive horizontal blade that you can charge that slows your mobility down. So you should only really do it when you're falling or in midair. And then when you release this, you do this room-clearing shockwave of death. And it's incredibly advantageous and dangerous to use. But if you pull it off, massive reward. Risk-reward, intricacies, interesting. And then you have the other one, which is another charge move. I don't remember the name of it, but it's a move that you can stick this on a cacodemon and it'll die. You can stick it on pain elementals. You can use this, you can stun a marauder, stick one of those on it, and then do your super shotgun into ballista combos to do massive damage and maybe even get a second falter, get another flinch. And here's where this base idea is good, but where the cracks start to show. Because in my opinion, guys, if you're going to homage something, if you're going to imitate something and you're going to ape it, you need to bring something new to the table, or you need to bring your own lilt on what you're imitating, what you're taking on. This game could have gone crazy and gone all over the place with features and functions, but it kind of stayed reserved. And I know that there'll be a lot of people that do enjoy that, because sometimes less can be more, and not everybody's looking for complexity and all these crazy things to interact with each other. But I think it's nice when it's there for the people looking for it. And don't get me wrong, Shadow Warrior 3 still has these weak spot systems where it's certain enemies can be stunned in certain ways or exploited in certain ways to get a big advantageous, you know, take on battle in that moment. You can use things like the freezing to come up with some interesting ways to have a go at them. You can use the environmental hazards that once you upgrade them a bit, they can get really, really useful. You know, you can do interesting weapon combinations and weapon swapping, so you can get the combos that you enjoy, moving between the sword and the rockets and the big boys and the shotguns and things, and you can have a ton of fun with this. And then when you combine it with that Kingdom Hearts goofiness of these absurdly powerful execution tools, it all leads to... Because, I mean, you could even compare it to Bayonetta, couldn't you? In Bayonetta, you do a torture attack on an enemy once you fill a bar, and then when you kill that enemy, you steal his weapon, and his weapon is this ludicrously arcade, silly move that generally does crowd control and lots of damage to everybody everywhere. And it's super fun. It's one of the most memorable parts of Bayonetta and one of the things I love the most. And that's exactly what this game is doing 20 years later. And it's doing it in a first-person shooter, which I think is wonderful. You know, it's adding to this pantheon, this rich arena of first-person shooters with all these interesting gimmicks and these silly features. And I love that. But at the same time, I don't know if you agree here, guys. Maybe you think that it's perfectly okay. I can't help but feel like this game perhaps should have had something more. I really like that, though. Grappling towards the enemies is something that's super good. I don't do it that often, but it is really, really cool. A super fun feature. But maybe you've got to watch the analysis videos to really appreciate what's going on. You know, the people that want to tell you about all the mechanics, and then they start spending 25 minutes on level design in a game that doesn't have the best level design, and you wonder, why am I watching this again? Because it's really confusing. But a lot of these factors are really, really, really subjective. So it can be difficult to kind of assess it, can't it? And you might be thinking, that seems kind of ironic, Chris, to throw shade towards these people that make these critiques and these essays on video games, and then you're talking 2 hours over this video. Fine point, isn't it? Easily counter-argued, though. I'm not choosing to do this. This is a necessary evil of what I do. Like, if I could just let this gameplay play, and then just send this and just throw it up on YouTube, and everyone's like, this is great, thanks, Chris, what a great production, what great videos, this is awesome, then I would probably do that, instead of the redundancy of having to talk over something where I feel like I don't have much to say. But people have come to expect a different standard from me, and that standard is is commentary. It's commentary at length on several topics. So this is a necessary evil of a box that I have carved and I have to now live in. And I do quite enjoy the rambling of it, and I do quite enjoy keeping that blade sharp, because I don't do it as much as I used to do. So every so often when I come back to these and I sit down and we start talking bollocks for 2 hours, it's pretty good, you know, keeps me sharp, reminds me of where I've come from, and reminds me that OBS is still having encoding errors at certain parts of certain games, and you guys get to see freeze frames, which is really frustrating, and it makes me want to re-record this game, but I've already uninstalled it and deleted all the assets, so whoops. Yeah, it's having a real difficulty here, guys. I do apologise about this. It's one of those things where when you're playing, of course, you don't really notice it. If I had noticed it, maybe I would have stopped it and seen if anything was happening on my PC at the time, but it'll be fun when I figure out how to stop this from happening in the future, because my hardware is good enough in every conceivable way. My settings are generally good enough for most things, but every so often we get this just horrendous moment. Do you know what this could be, though? It has been hot recently, hasn't it? And it was pretty hot when I was recording this, so my PC might be a little bit hotter than usual. It might be putting a bit more stress on the temperatures, a bit more stress on things like the CPU, so this could just be a necessary occurrence from a bunch of factors coming together. And I wouldn't have made this walkthrough if it was up to me. I would have waited until it was a bit cooler, and maybe this wouldn't have been as egregious as it's being right now. It calmed down for a long period, so thankfully it didn't ruin too much of the footage. But PCs work in mysterious ways, and OBS is even more mysterious still. I suppose we can take credence in knowing that that's not a very difficult fight, and I don't think anybody needs me to guide them through such an encounter. If you've made it this far, you've done the hardest fights in the game, except for perhaps the final one. The final one's very difficult. And I'm happy to report that I died more on normal than I did on hardcore when I recorded this, because I didn't die, I got it in one attempt. And there's a couple of close moments, it's pretty hairy, but I think it's 3 phases in a row, and then you go and fight a boss. So it's not the most difficult thing you've ever done, but it's definitely pretty demanding. But yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, the obligation to do something. How do people feel about commentary anymore? Do you think it's evolved into the way it's supposed to evolve? Has it moved to what you want, to what you thought it was going to do, or is it kind of stagnated and it never really got going to begin with? This is just a massive auto-scrolling level, this. You spend the whole thing chasing this grapple point and then doing platforming. And if you've never played this game and you've just stumbled on my video, there's lots of moments similar to this where you grapple into this wall run, into shooting something into another grapple. And you might be looking at this and thinking, this looks pretty fun. If you think this looks really fun, you should definitely play this game, because there's a lot of this and I've removed it. And the reason I've removed it is because it winds me up. And it winds me up from just, I'm so sick and tired of essential loading screen gameplay is what I call it, that I now officially would rather watch a loading screen than do this. And I think that that's such a jarring perspective to people who don't have my level of experience with video games. Like, if you've just started playing games and you love everything, and you know, you're just jumping in on all these new titles and just being like, this is the most ridiculous pastime, what an amazing hobby, what an amazing industry, you're gonna have a lot of fun, right? You've got so much to discover, and I envy you, because I am not that person. I have put a lot of time into la video game, la videojuegos, and unfortunately there is always something that is lost over time, you know. Gradual exposure to things leads to, it's almost like a calcification, isn't it? It's almost like the way your skin becomes to callous and harden when it is exposed to stimuli and exposed to a resistance, to a friction, and then it doesn't feel the same. It's not sensitive, the nerve is not there to the same extent because it's got this natural armor growing over it. And what happens there is that sense of joy starts to fade, it starts to become more difficult to find, more difficult to generate, and you start to see more bad than good, don't you? And then there'll come a point where you might even become so disenfranchised and so just demoralized from the entire genre that you move away and you do something else. So for me, like, I think of all the times in video games where I've done a platforming sequence that is so scripted it's barely asking me to do anything. And I was tired of platforming that didn't ask me to do anything in the early 2000s, because I came from a game called Prince of Persia: Sands of Time. And Prince of Persia: Sands of Time nailed cinematic platforming before almost any other game did. Plenty of games were doing it to some extent, but not the way that Prince of Persia did. And then they embellished upon it and they really refined it, and they got to something really special with Warrior Within and the tower game. The two towers, the twin towers. I always forget the name of that. Is it the Two Thrones? The 9/11 game, you know, that doesn't involve terrorists. Instead it involves like a dark half of the prince. That game. By the way, this fight's really hard. And this fight's really hard because I ended up getting shit-faced really early and losing a ton of HP, and the HP was all out of season. There was nothing to give me life back, so I had to use this grapple over here to wait for the respawns to go back on proc so I could come back and actually stand a chance to survive. And you keep getting stuck here. The reason I don't like this level is not only because of the aesthetic of it, but this is the area where I got stuck to geometry the most. There's a couple of ladders in the game that high frame rates seem to really badly affect, and you just can't go up them, and it's really annoying. But in this area, the amount of times you get stuck on like a rib or on like the side arse cheek of this weird fucking dragon intestine is just really, really stupid and really frustrating. And then in this moment, I have no HP, I have no execution ability. All I can really do here is run around the room, try not to get hit, hopefully get some life, or hopefully kill these Kugutsus and get some of their HP drops, but I can die at any moment here. Anything hits me here, I'm dead, pretty much. Especially now, when I'm on 0 HP, like it's... I probably should have died here. It got really hairy. I'm glad that I didn't, though. One of the elements that I've really come to appreciate with walkthroughs over the years is that human element, that element of struggle and strife. I used to always try to adhere to try and get the most impressive and like perfect gameplay, even though when you look back on the gameplay it's miserable and terrible and low skill and low effort and low garbage and all that, because of course, you know, standards change. But at the time I felt like I was really hitting on some of the best stuff I could do, and I wanted it to be that way so that it was the best thing to watch. And I reiterate this on a few walkthroughs recently of, that isn't what everybody wants. That's what I wanted at the time, and that was the standard that I valued. But you come to realise very quickly that your standards and a lot of other people's standards on YouTube are not the same. And then going back to that Prince of Persia topic, I was so bored of platforming because Prince of Persia kind of did it perfectly for me and changed my opinion on it between God of War, Prince of Persia and a bunch of other games. When I came to play Uncharted, I thought the platforming was boring and rote and uninspired and easy. When I played Assassin's Creed and it became so automatic that the guy just climbs by himself, I felt like they just completely missed the mark and turned it into something it should have never been. And then every game copied it. So, flash forward now to when we get first-person shooters doing it, you know. I was platforming in first-person shooters back on N64, back on Turok, and getting really frustrated because it was hard as hell, but the platforming in those games was precise and tight and creative and quite skillful, because manipulating the camera and the depth perception was hard. But you come to this, and the platforming in this game it's like queuing at an ATM machine to me, because it's so rote and uninspired. And it's not bad, you know. I would never say it's bad. It looks fine, it sounds fine. It's a bit slow for my taste and a bit perfunctory, but fundamentally, you grapple hook, then you wall run, then you jump, then you shoot something, then you wall run, then you land on a platform, then you jump on another wall run. It's all very established mediums of platforming. But I've just done it for too long, in too many games that have done it far too well. And if you're somebody that values movement a ton, as I do, movement to me in games is one of those things that most games fuck up so much that it makes the games infinitely worse. So their foundation is already flawed. They'll never have what they could have because their movement's not there. So when you come to a game that does have good movement, you really notice it, and it's something you come to really want in most games that you play. So when you do find a game with decent movement and then it goes to do platforming, and the movement that I'm doing during the battles is faster and more interesting than the movement they require of me on the platforming, it leads to this disconnect. It leads to this dissonance. And the dissonance is, the platforming is so boring to someone who has done platforming a lot that it would be more beneficial to either watch a cutscene or indeed not be playing. And that's one of those things that if you were to tell that to somebody, they wouldn't understand it. You know those people that say, why would you watch someone else play a video game? You know those guys that don't get Twitch and have never been on YouTube and are too busy, I don't know, crushing vagina because they're so manly or whatever it is they tell themselves? But imagine being that person that doesn't understand or can't put themselves in someone else's shoes, and they like super get into video games and they love platforming, you know. They're so obsessed with platforming, it's their favourite thing. They're playing Shadow Warrior 3 and they're in love with the platforming more than the shooting. And then they listen to this video and I say, I would rather go and get a drink, then do this platforming, I find it that uninspired. To me, it feels like busy work. It feels like a chore, a literal errand. Yet to them, it's tripping all these wonderful endorphins. It's tripping all these fun feelings in the brain. They're being like, this is awesome, dude. This is cool. I love this. And it's that thing, isn't it? It's the progressive exposure. It's the frame of reference. It's where were you when this started, and were you present? Because if you weren't, it probably seems very fun and very pleasant and a nice breakup of the pacing, because platforming in many games is used to pace the engagements, to give you the palate cleanser, to give you the nice mint before the next course, you know, or the whatever it is, you know, the prawn cocktail. And for most people, that you get to that middle ground of acceptance, don't you, where you've played games for a decent amount of time and you've invested in them a decent amount of time, but you don't have to necessarily, you know, overanalyze them or play them too much. So that when you get to a platforming sequence like that, your brain acknowledges that, oh yeah, this is a bit of a low moment now, so I can kind of get my breath back, I can kind of reset, I can kind of, you know, take my hand off the wheel and recline. And you come to understand that it might be masking loading, it might be just, you know, giving you a little bit of a breather from what you were doing. And you don't even register it, you know, it's like brushing your teeth. Do you think about brushing your teeth that much, or when you go to the toilet? Do you think about going to the toilet and the ritual that involves? You don't, do you? Because you do it so much. You neither love it nor hate it. You might have an opinion of that particular one when it happens, be it good or bad, or something, you know, memorable or something innocuous happens. But you're not sitting around thinking about, next time I go to the toilet, I'm really going to analyse what I'm doing with the left arm and the right arm. Like, you're not thinking like that because it's almost automatic. And it's automatic because we haven't come up with a better way yet. We haven't come up with a new way that means that we don't have to engage in that. So we just do it, and we do it so much our brain filters it as white noise. It's like, have you ever tried not to flush a toilet when you've been to a toilet? Or have you ever tried not to put a toilet seat down if you're a family that puts the toilet seat down? It's the hardest thing in the world. Because you've done it so much, you've conditioned your brain. It is a programmed response. You know, it's like shutting your eyes when you sneeze. You just can't help it. It's madness. And you don't think about it because you do it autonomously. It is an autonomic function at this point, practically. It's governed by a part of your brain that you've embedded so deep that you don't realise that you're an absolute slave to the rhythms of it. And that's what it's like when you do platforming for most people. Platforming in a game, you know, walking sequences in games, they become so programmed and so automatic that you don't even notice them. And I think that's why people don't complain about them like I'm complaining about it right now. I think people get into that mindset of, oh, it's not too bad. You know, it's not too bad. You know those people say it's better than nothing? You know that it's better than nothing people? I love that particular piece of philosophical rumination, because to me it's the apologetics of the finest, isn't it? It's the will of self-deception, and I think a lot of people do it because they can't help but do it. Everything is better than nothing, guys. Did you know that? Somebody wiping shit in your eye is better than nothing, because nothing is negation, nothing is the absence of anything. Nothing means you never existed, you never got to experience anything. Nothing's kind of garbage, it's kind of the worst place to be. So, being stabbed by a frozen turd shaped like your famous religious figure in the most disrespectful manner ever is better than nothing. So the argument completely breaks down because you can compare anything better than nothing, because nothing is almost a factor that cannot be measured by how insignificant and unimpressive it is. So it comes into that really funny mindset, doesn't it, of, oh, it's better than nothing. But does that validate it? Does that make it something that should be repeated, something that should reoccur? Probably not. But maybe you never thought about it. And you find a lot of people like that, especially on the internet, especially on a video like this. If you go and watch a lot of people on YouTube and you check the comments, you'll see the person that's completely with the YouTuber, completely with the sentiments being shared and the narrative and the dialogue. Which technically is a monologue, because a dialogue defers to people speaking, doesn't it, or multiple people. But I like to think of this as a dialogue, because you guys share what you think in the comments, and I talk bollocks to myself. But it's that interesting idea, isn't it, of the discourse that breeds around it. People get super into the topic and super into the speaker, and you get the people who agree, then you get the people that completely disagree. And then you get all of the middle grounds. And then you find those people. There are people on the internet that do not want anything remotely critical or negative or obstructive in their path. They want a Final Fantasy XIII experience of a giant straight line of nothing but platitudes. They want this boulevard of cushioned platitudes and ego boosts. And I find it really interesting. And it makes me wonder how you get like that. How you get into that line. They're the people that... You know how when LTG loses in a fighting game, he hides the screen? I think that's really interesting psychologically, that, because he is so proud and so obstinate that he cannot accept the loss, and that the loss is in some way a forgery or unearned or illicit and not legitimate. The legitimacy of his loss is so questionable that it's not even worth watching. Because if you watch it, it gives it more credence than it deserves, and it's not worth the mental capacity to even let your eyes lay upon it. And he's trying to protect himself, isn't he, bless him? Good old Dale. Everybody's favourite reciter of Shakespeare when he's not being very gay and very racist. Because he's trying his best to, in between talking about dicks, and what you should do with your dick while you watch him, which is very telling, Dale. Just come out of the closet, it'll be perfectly fine, dude. It's 2022. Life's different now. But he can't face a reality where it doesn't fit his narrative, his structure, the way that he perceives himself and how he wishes to be perceived. So it is always through this very obscure lens. And that lens has made him famous, you know, on the internet. Not in good reasons, and not for reasons you want to be famous. You know, he's famous like Gary Glitter's famous. Made a couple of good songs, and then, of course, did something horrendous that will never be forgotten. And that's not to say that our buddy Dale is of the same ilk of our enemy, Mr. Gary. But it's that thing, isn't it, where somebody becomes famous for something that is the opposite of what you want to become famous for, and then they will probably spend the rest of their lives, their existences, kind of facing up to what that is. And if you don't know who Gary Glitter is, I don't recommend googling him. He's not worth your time or your heart space. Although he did make some bangers in like the 80s. But Dale is interesting because Dale still has a chance. A lot of the things that make him an interesting personality could be fabrications, they could be acts. He is an actor after all. I think it's a bit too embedded and a bit too natural, and it comes a bit too quickly and a bit too consistently for it to be a full act. But I don't think the LTG is like that all the time. I think there will be moments where it comes away, and I think there might be moments where he can actually salvage himself and realise that perhaps this is not for me. And it always makes me wonder with people like that, because you're always going to get people on the internet who disagree with you. You're always going to get interesting personalities on the internet, because that's what the internet is. It's this cauldron, isn't it? This bubbling cauldron of things that you are now exposed to that you never were. So for LTG, maybe in 20 years, he'll look back on this YouTube clips that are still around, and he'll laugh at them. And he'll be very self-depreciating, and he'll kind of go, what was wrong with me? Why was I like this? And it might be the best thing that ever happened to him, and the thing that edified him and made him a better person. But on the flip side, maybe it's too ingrained, maybe it's too late, maybe it's all he'll ever be known for. And same with those people that need platitudes and need everything to be positive. You know, I bump into those people all the time on my stream where they'll come in and they'll be like, oh, I love this game, and it's like, yeah, it's pretty good, right? And then maybe 10 minutes later, I'll struggle to climb up a ladder because the game's got a weird collision, and I'll be like, wow, that's pretty shit, why is it doing that? And then that person will get really defensive. And we've all been there, you know, we've all been kids that were in love with the game and we saw nothing but its pros and none of its flaws, but I think it's the flaws that make the games more interesting. It's what makes them resonate even more. And I think when you love something for its flaws just as much as you love it for its virtues, I think that's when you really get into the interesting components and the things that construct why you are so smitten with what you're interacting with. There are so many games that are filled with flaws and have no really redeeming features, but you forget them, don't you? Because they're just half-assed and half-made and poorly planned and poorly developed on and poorly delivered. But every so often, like a game like this, I think this game is way more fascinating to me to look at and to think about because it has all these weird things going for it. I watched a video the other day by a guy called Under the Mayo, who's known for playing Doom Eternal and talking about the mechanics on it, and some of that guy's videos I really agree with and I quite enjoy the Discord he puts up. Other ones not so much, you know, it's the joys of YouTube and it's the joys of opinion. And he was talking about how he complained in this game about the hard difficulty not being hard enough, and he made a joke that he was the reason why they added the hardcore difficulty. And it was obvious in the video that he was being silly, but at the same time there's probably a lot of credence to that, you know. because that guy has a decent following on YouTube. People know who he is, and people know him from Doom and from the developers engaging with him and essentially encouraging his critiques and the way that he viewed their game. And I think there's a danger in that a little bit, because he reviewed the DLC for the Ancient Gods Part 2, I think it was, and he was very harsh on it, and I agreed with him too. Thought it was a good review. And then unfortunately the community took it as an opportunity to talk mad shit at the developers and have a go and say some pretty harsh things and like review bomb the game. And I don't really understand that. I think the difficulty of the Ancient Gods Part 2 is quite interesting and fascinating, because the first one was too hard, then the second one was too easy. And when you do that, it shows you that the developer is trying to find a middle ground. And they're struggling. And one of the biggest problems when a developer is struggling is sometimes they listen to the wrong people. How many games have you played, guys, that are balanced by the people in the community that are asking for the wrong things? Think about something like a fighting game, where they're asking for their main to be buffed because they play them. You know those people that can't see beyond themselves? Where they want things to change so that it benefits what they want, but they don't think about how that affects what anyone else wants? And if you feel like I've been that way on this commentary, I do apologise, because it's not my intention. Of course, I am going to put forward my perspective when I make these, because it's kind of all I know how to do. But fundamentally, I want the game to have features in there that I don't agree with and I don't necessarily enjoy, because I know other people will. And I think you need to have that. This is the final fight in the game, this is a massive gauntlet, and it is quite challenging. But you have a super huge room, and your mobility here is going to really help. I want to grab this dude, get my life back, and use his guns, so that's the reason why I was jumping towards him then. So for me, like a game having things that I don't like in it and things that I disagree with, make that game more interesting, and it makes it better to talk about. Because it means we're going to clash heads, we're going to have disagreements. I disagree with a lot of what Under the Mayo says about Doom. That guy liked purple goo, and to me that's irredeemable. There's nothing fun about a game about moving fast that is designed to make you move slow. That to me is misunderstanding the entire point of Doom. And there are a few things like that that he said in the past that he really likes. But you know what's cool about Doom Eternal? It has everything. It has something for everyone, doesn't it? And, you know, you've got a player base that thinks that Resident Evil 8 invented weapon swapping, and that's awesome, right? You've got people that think that Doom Eternal invented weapon swapping, and, you know, more power to you. We're all vehicles of our experience and what we know, you know? And depending on what you've played will depend on how you see a lot of these features, and that's what makes those analysis videos that I don't necessarily enjoy so enjoyable for so many people. Because if you haven't played what I've played, and if you haven't been down the roads I've been down, you might get a lot from them, and you might think about things you would have never thought of. And I think that that's what makes them important, in as much as I don't like them. In as much that you might listen to this and think that this is just a rambly English moron talking about random bullshit that goes all over the place and there's no need for it. I just wanted to know where to go, and you didn't even have it in the video because you cut it out. Terrible walkthrough, thumbs down, you know, even if it's that. Everybody's going to see what they're going to see. Everyone's going to have a different perspective on it, and depending on your personal experience, this is what's going to shade and colour how you perceive it and receive it. And if you're DSP, you're going to complain and beg for money. And if you're LTG, you're going to talk about UPS drivers with peanut butter stowy complexions, wearing like really tight shorts and talking about dicks, which is very odd. But you can't help it, can you? Because it's the product of all of the things you've experienced, and that product is you. But when you shoot this, it's going to trigger the next sequence in this battle. And again, guys, there's a couple of strategies you can use here, which I do quite recommend. One of them is, before you shoot them to trigger the next wave, go around the environment picking up the HP to replenish yourself. Try and get maybe an execution on a fodder enemy so you can get a nice 200 HP if you want to do that. And then try and kill as many as you can to build up your execution bar, so the next wave, when it turns up, you can kill the biggest thing and use his weapon to kill everything else. And I'm just doing a bit of a circuit here, guys, to make sure that I've restocked on everything and everything's reloaded. And I'm probably going to go and grab the Obarion dude and then use his miniguns, because I find them really fun and they remind me of a weapon from South Park. And again, frames of reference, right, folks? So in the late 90s and the early 2000s, there was an acclaimed first-person shooter on the N64 by the name of South Park. The main enemy in that game was turkeys. Crazy turkeys that attacked you, and your base weapon was a snowball. And that snowball had a secondary function, where you could piss on it, turn it into a yellow snowball, and it did more damage. I asked for that game for my birthday because I was obsessed with South Park, and I really liked Turok, which was the game that Acclaim had made before that they went on to get the license to do that game with. And then when I played it, I didn't think it was that great, and I wasn't that great at it because I was quite young, and of course you didn't beat games when you were young, so I ended up trading it with somebody, and I never beat that game without the cheats on. I want to go back to that game at some point and play it, maybe play it for YouTube, see how hard it really is, play it on PC, try and get the mouse working, and see if it's any good. But the weapon in that game is, it was a automatic machine gun, but it was like a Nerf dart gun. It fired rubberized bullets. And that's the gun that creature's weapon reminds me of, and that's one of the reasons that I smile at this. And I love that in games, you know, when you come across something that reminds you of something from when you were younger and it elevates it to something a bit more special. Because this encounter here is just a couple of Mogura brothers, you've got the Siakora dudes, and I'm losing a lot of HP and trying to get it back, but as long as you keep at a decent range from this enemy and take him out quickly, he's not too bad. I really recommend the submachine gun on him as well, because the submachine gun's consistent damage, and if you can't swap to anything else and hit him at that range, the submachine gun will do a lot of work for you. Oh, did I follow through the map? This is a problem, this, dude. I wish you could just kind of hook back up. It'd be nice if there was a get out of jail for free move, because the amount of times I fall through the map is a ton. And when I say fall through the map, I don't literally mean glitching through the map. I mean just kind of fall off. I fall through the map all the time. And it's frustrating because I like moving, you know, I like jumping around. And it is my fault. I should have a bit more foresight to not fall off. But it happens, doesn't it? And it's so easy to happen. Now we've just got a couple of the twins here. And I'm using this again, guys. I can't quite remember the string of battles here. So I'm running around trying to get my life back, waiting for the HP to regen. And I'm trying to get ammo while I'm doing it. And every so often, when they hop up and they start firing at me, I'm going to hit them with the Basilisk and some other things and just do a bit of damage to them. But I don't want to kill them too quickly because I want to get my resources back. And you can hear just then, and you might have seen him, there's one of those suicide running dudes that are a bit like the enemy from Serious Sam. He's stuck in the geometry, which means that if I kill these guys, he will still be around and I'll have to kill him to trigger the next part of the game. So I can kill these dudes with immunity now and I don't have to worry about messing with the spawns. So now I'm going to go in with some of the better weapons and do some damage to them. And I really recommend that saw blade gun because it does stun them when they come out. You can also freeze them with the sword when they come out and then kill them by the time they recover, which is really strong. There's a lot of cool combos in this game if you experiment. And then right here, nothing else happens because that dude's stuck in the ground. But I don't know if I realised it was him. I don't know if I saw him at the time. So I'm just going to get my life back. I'm going to get some ammo. And then I'm going to go and kill him. And I think I realise here, I'm like, oh yeah, the guy's stuck. He's down here. And there he is. So unfortunately, that's a glitch. And then when you shoot that, it's the next phase of the fight. And there's a cutscene there. And then immediately, we take on the... Is it the Oberon Chief guy? And he just sits around trying to spam those proxy bombs. And there's a couple of Hattoris with him. So I'm going to steal this dude's sword. And then we're going to go from him to try and kill the other one of those chiefs. Because he's just across from me here. So we kill the Hattori, we kill the Kugutsu. And then we come on this dude and start smashing him in the face. Oboru Guruma, he's called, that guy. And look how powerful this weapon is. That weapon is by far one of the most useful ones you can grab. And then we get the spawn just then of the biggest enemy in the game, the Obarion. The dude with the South Park guns. And he's going to get really aggressive here, so I'm just going to move around as best as I can and not get caught. And I should probably just use the glory kill and take some HP from some of these dudes, but I'm just going to move around trying to pick the pickups and use the environment. This level, when you're not getting stuck on it, is actually pretty good, because there's an upper tier and there's a lower tier, and you can use that to get out of the trouble and let the fodder come to you and then kill them and get ammo. And if you hit these guys with your sword, you will get ammo back. So there's a nice little intricate dance between getting the pickups and then just killing the jobbers. And I really like that as much as it is 100%, you know, imitative of id's design in their seminal games. The exceptional re-envisioning of Doom. Which, I wonder what they're going to do next. What do you think, guys? What is the next Doom game? Do you think it's going to change massively? Can you imagine if it's such a contrast from Eternal and it's completely different? Part of me will be a little sad because I quite like Eternal, but Eternal's there, you know? Eternal's there forever, so if I want to play that, I'll go and play it. I want them to do something vastly different. I want them to do it again. Completely mix up the first-person shooter genre and do something that no one's doing and make us realise that there's more legs in this franchise, or at least in this genre, than anyone realises at the moment. Because we've been playing shooters for like 40 years. 40 years of the same kind of game, and it survives because people love it. Now it's time to start really redefining and changing what it means and being exciting again. And that's exactly what Doom Eternal did, in my opinion. And I thought it was going to be the beginning of a bunch of homages, because back in the old days when Doom turned up, Doom clones were everywhere. Doom changed everything and everyone was making them. And I really thought that Doom Eternal was going to do the same. And there's like 2 games, and this is one of them. You just don't really see it yet. I wonder if they're all developing them. I wonder if COVID had a weird effect. I wonder if I've just hurt the video by mentioning the dreaded word. Then again, it's 2 hours into this video. If the YouTube algorithm's going to punish you for something 2 hours into the video, you can tell that they're fucking assholes and they didn't like you to begin with. But there's a lot of Hatoris here, so just take your time. Don't overextend. You can be way more aggressive here comboing on the Hatori when you stun him, and you can pretty much put him down. But if you do that, sometimes you'll get hit by the other ones. And I really didn't want to repeat this fight, so I'm just going to be patient. I'm just going to win it like a war of attrition. There's plenty of space, plenty of layers, plenty of levels, and use the level changes against them because they have to jump around. And then eventually, this encounter will stop and it fades into the boss fight. And then you have the Guardian of the Heart, which is the final boss of the game. And if you've played Devil May Cry 3, you'll recognise him because it's always nice to see that after that game, Arkham managed to get some work. I just thought he would sit around in hell, you know, twiddling his thumbs, wishing he was up there, out there, doing something better, but turns out he's waited all these years to become an underwhelming final boss again. Luckily in that game, he wasn't the true final boss, he was just the debated final boss, and then the true final boss turned up and kicked your ass, whereas in this game, unfortunately, this is as good as it gets. But the idea here is quite simple. This boss is going to put pressure on you by hopping towards you, and then he's going to hit you with some tentacles. Depending on what the tentacle is, depends on how you dodge it. This one, you want to be as far away from it as you can, because when you try and jump it, sometimes it still hits you, because its hitbox is nuclear. And the movement he did just then in the second phase releases a shockwave, so it's a good idea. I don't know what hit me then. Answers on a postcard. Game's fucking weird. But it can be a good idea to jump the shockwave as if you were close to it when you're not. And in the room, there's both ammo and HP, and you want to always make sure you've got at least 50 HP, or when he hits you, outside of that second chance you get, you're going to die. And all you do is pop his eyes, wait to see the move, dodge the move accordingly, and then pop the eyes. This phase means he's going to go up onto the roof, and there's a couple of the eyes you can shoot, but there's these really big ones that are structural. So if you shoot the structural ones, it will, I think it stuns him momentarily, and then you can make him fall down. And then when it comes to just the final one, he comes back down to the ground, and it's the next phase. And this is where he changes his pattern slightly. So he sticks everything out, and he starts doing this rotisserie, rotating blade thing. And then you want to jump around and hit the weak points. But I had trouble over here getting my attack to register. And you're going to see this. Watch this. Okay, game. I guess I'm missing this guy. There you go. That one hit. And you don't have to use this weapon, but I was using it because I had ammo. And I wanted to save my other weapons for the next phase. And then here, if you move to the right, you can strafe most of this. But if you stand still on that one, it won't hit you. And then this one must be dodged. Or strafed as well. And then this jump will have a shockwave, so make sure you jump it. And then you can hit him with an explosive and get rid of some of his orbs. And do a ton of damage. And then he just kind of repeats this until you hurt him enough, and then he goes back up again, and it's... I don't think it's a bad first-person boss, I just think its visual presentation is terrible. And in video games, when your boss is just a pulsating orb-like tumor with tentacles, are we really any further away from the classic Urotsuki Doji Legend of the Overfiend? I don't think we are, right? All it needs here is a stylized tip, and it's just a bunch of dicks in a ball. And that would be funny, because, you know, the whole game is based around a character called Lo Wang. And Wang is, of course, a really cool name that has nothing to do with any sexual innuendo. But just stop on this one and then shoot both of the limbs. And then you just keep doing this until he dies. And the boss does hurt you, and you might die here once or twice, but as soon as he goes back onto the roof like this, you've pretty much won. So make sure you get some HP, kill his structural orbs, be careful of whatever just hit me then. Something got me good, I don't know what it was. And then he's going to fall down, and then you go into this weird moment where you have to do this bounce. And then you bounce up and it hits a cutscene and you've won. And that's the end of the walkthrough, guys. But before that, you have to do some wonderfully slow and unimpressive old man platforming. Very reminiscent of the end of Ninja Gaiden 2 here, where you have to do a bunch of platforming before you take on the final boss. But I really do like this guide. I had a lot of fun making it, and I like this game too. So if it resonated at all and you had a good time with it, then I achieved my goal. And if you didn't, I guess I'll have to try harder next time. But thank you for watching, and you take care now.